Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we begin today's attack report, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe. Also, write now in the comments which city you're watching from. We'd love to know. All of this because the crisp Montana air filled my lungs as I stepped out of my car, eager to start my hike. It was a beautiful summer day, perfect for exploring the dense forests that had always called to me. I'd driven for hours from Missoula to reach this remote trailhead, seeking solitude and a break from the chaos of city life. Little did I know that this peaceful escape would turn into a nightmare that would haunt me forever. I shouldered my backpack, double-checking that I had enough water and snacks for the day-long hike. The trail map showed a challenging but rewarding route through some of the most pristine wilderness in the state. As I set off, the gravel crunching beneath my boots, I couldn't help but smile at the adventure ahead. The first mile was easy, a gentle incline that wound through sun-dappled clearings. Wildflowers dotted the path, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the deep greens of the forest. I paused to take a few photos, making a mental note to show them to my friend Sarah later. She'd be jealous she couldn't make it on this trip. "Next time, Sarah," I muttered to myself, grinning as I imagined her reaction to the breathtaking scenery. As I ventured deeper into the forest, the trail became more challenging. The dense canopy overhead filtered the sunlight, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance around me. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, an inexplicable unease settling in the pit of my stomach. "Get it together, Hannah," I chided myself. "You've hiked alone plenty of times before." But something felt different this time. The forest, which had always been a source of comfort and wonder, now seemed to hold a menacing presence. I tried to shake off the feeling, focusing instead on the physical exertion of the hike. After about 2 hours, I reached a small clearing and decided to take a break. I sat on a fallen log, pulling out my water bottle and a granola bar. As I ate, I noticed how quiet it had become. The usual chorus of bird song and insect buzzing had faded away, leaving an unnatural silence in its wake. A twig snapped somewhere behind me, sending a chill down my spine despite the warm afternoon air. I whipped my head around, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. Nothing. Just the endless sea of green, still and silent. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and fragile in the vast forest. "Is anyone there?" No response. Of course not, I thought. I'm miles from the nearest person. It was probably just a deer or something. I packed up my things, suddenly eager to keep moving. As I stood, I caught a whiff of something foul on the breeze. It was a musky, almost rotten smell that made my nose wrinkle in disgust. "Ugh, what is that?" I muttered, looking around for the source. Maybe a dead animal nearby? I decided to pick up the pace, wanting to put some distance between myself and whatever was causing that stench. The trail narrowed as it wound up a steep incline, forcing me to focus on my footing. My calves burned with the effort, but I welcomed the distraction from my growing unease. Reaching the top of the hill, I paused to catch my breath. The view was spectacular, with rolling mountains stretching as far as the eye could see. For a moment, I forgot my fears, lost in the majesty of nature. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural sound that was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It wasn't quite a growl, not quite a roar, but something in between that made every hair on my body stand on end. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Slowly, I turned towards the sound, my eyes scanning the tree line. Nothing. The forest had fallen completely silent again, as if holding its breath. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, barely daring to breathe. "It's nothing," I whispered to myself, trying to calm my racing heart. "Just your imagination playing tricks on you." But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. The peaceful hike I had planned was quickly turning into something far more sinister. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone, hoping to call for help or at least let someone know where I was. No signal. Of course. I was too far out in the wilderness. "Okay, Hannah," I said aloud, needing to hear a human voice, even if it was just my own. You have two choices. Turn back now or keep going and finish the hike as planned. The only response was another snap, closer this time, followed by the rustle of undergrowth being disturbed by something large. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but fear had rooted me to the spot. I stood there, trembling, as the sounds of something approaching grew louder. Then, through a gap in the trees, I saw it. A massive, fur-covered arm, easily as thick as my torso, reached out and grabbed a tree trunk. My mind struggled to comprehend what my eyes were seeing as more of the creature came into view. It was huge, at least 8 feet tall, covered in matted brown fur. Its face was a nightmarish blend of ape and man, with deep-set eyes that glowed with an intelligence that seemed impossible for a mere animal. Our eyes met, and in that moment I knew true terror. This was no man in a costume, no bear standing on its hind legs. This was something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist. The creature's lips pulled back in a snarl, revealing yellowed, pointed teeth. It let out a roar that shook me to my very core, the sound echoing through the forest and shattering the unnatural silence. Finally, my paralysis broke. I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the trail as I fled in blind panic. Behind me, I could hear the creature crashing through the underbrush, in pursuit. The peaceful hike I had planned now seemed like a distant dream. "Okay, Hannah," I whispered to myself, trying to calm my racing heart. "Think. You need to find your way back to the trail, back to your car." I fumbled for my phone, praying for a signal. Nothing. Of course. I was about to shove it back in my pocket when a twig snapped nearby. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Slowly, I turned towards the sound. Through the trees, I caught a glimpse of something massive moving. It was circling, staying just out of clear sight, playing with me. The realization sent a fresh wave of terror through my body. I needed to move. Now. But which way? I had no idea where the trail was, and in my panic, I'd lost all sense of direction. The creature let out a low growl, closer now. I made a split-second decision and started limping away as fast as my injured ankle would allow. The forest seemed to close in around me, every shadow potentially hiding the monster. I pushed through a thick patch of undergrowth, branches scratching at my arms and face. As I emerged on the other side, my foot caught on an exposed root. I went down hard, crying out in pain as I hit the ground. Before I could get up, a massive, fur-covered arm burst from the undergrowth, swiping at me with terrifying force. I rolled, narrowly avoiding its razor-sharp claws. The creature's foul stench overwhelmed me as it emerged fully from the trees. Seeing it up close, I was struck by its sheer size. It towered over me, easily 8 or 9 feet tall, with a broad, muscular frame covered in thick, matted fur. Its face was a nightmarish blend of ape and man, with deep-set eyes that burned with an almost human intelligence. Those eyes locked onto mine, filled with a primal rage that chilled me to my core. The beast let out a bone-chilling roar that echoed through the forest, shaking me to my very soul. "No, please," I whimpered, scrambling backward on all fours. "This can't be happening." The creature advanced, its massive feet crushing the underbrush. I managed to get to my feet, but my injured ankle gave way as soon as I put weight on it. I fell against a tree, using it to support myself as I faced the approaching monster. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I grabbed a fallen branch, holding it out in front of me like a weapon. "Stay back," I yelled, trying to sound braver than I felt. The beast paused, tilting its head as if confused by my defiance. For a split second, I allowed myself to hope that it might leave me alone. That hope was shattered as the creature lunged forward, easily knocking the branch from my hands. Its massive paw wrapped around my arm, yanking me off my feet. I screamed in agony as I felt something in my shoulder pop. The world spun as the beast flung me through the air. I crashed into a tree trunk, the impact sending waves of pain through my body. I crumpled to the ground, dazed and struggling to breathe. Through blurred vision, I saw the creature approaching. This was it, I thought. This is how I die, torn apart by something that shouldn't even exist. but some small part of me refused to give up. With every ounce of strength I had left, I pushed myself up and started to run. My ankle screamed in protest, but adrenaline numbed the pain. I zigzagged between trees, ducking under low-hanging branches, desperate to put some distance between myself and the monster. I could hear it behind me, crashing through the forest. Its roars of frustration echoed off the trees, spurring me to run faster despite my injuries. Suddenly, the trees thinned out, and I found myself bursting into a small clearing. Hope surged through me as I recognized where I was. I'd passed through here earlier on my hike. The trail couldn't be far. But before I could celebrate, something slammed into my back, sending me sprawling. I hit the ground hard, the air driven from my lungs. Gasping, I rolled over to see the creature looming over me, its massive form blocking out the sky. "No!" I choked out, raising my arms in a futile attempt to protect myself. The beast's arm came down in a vicious swipe. White-hot pain exploded across my torso as its claws tore through my shirt and into my flesh. I screamed, the sound raw and primal. In a desperate move, I kicked out with both feet, somehow managing to catch the creature in what I hoped was a sensitive area. It let out a bellow of pain and stumbled back, giving me just enough space to scramble away. I got to my feet, swaying as a wave of dizziness washed over me. Blood soaked my shirt, and every movement sent fresh agony through my body. But I couldn't stop. Not now. I started running again, pushing through the pain. Behind me, I could hear the creature recovering, its roars of rage spurring me on. The trees blurred as I ran, my only focus on putting one foot in front of the other. Time seemed to lose all meaning. I had no idea how long I'd been running or how far I'd gone. My body was on the verge of collapse, running purely on fear and adrenaline. Just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, I burst out of the tree line onto a gravel road. My car. It was there, just 100 yards away. Safety. With a final burst of energy, I sprinted towards it, fumbling for my keys. The sound of breaking branches behind me told me the creature was close. So close. I reached the car, my shaking hands struggling to unlock the door. "Come on," I muttered, panic rising in my throat. Finally, the lock clicked. I yanked the door open and threw myself inside, slamming it shut, just as a massive form emerged from the forest. The beast charged towards the car, its roars of fury muffled by the closed windows. I jammed the key into the ignition, turning it with a prayer on my lips. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into reverse just as the creature reached us. Its massive fist slammed into the hood, leaving a huge dent. The windshield cracked as it pounded on the glass, its snarling face inches away from mine. Screaming, I floored the accelerator. The tires spun on the gravel before finding purchase, and the car shot backward. The sudden movement caused the beast to lose its grip, and it fell away. I spun the wheel, shifting into drive. As I sped away, I caught one last glimpse of the creature in my rearview mirror. It stood at the edge of the forest, watching me go. Even from a distance, I could feel the weight of its gaze. As the forest receded behind me, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by waves of pain and nausea. My vision blurred, and I struggled to keep the car on the road. I needed help. I needed a hospital. But as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in, a new fear took hold. Who would believe me? Who would believe that I had been attacked by a creature that wasn't supposed to exist? As I sped toward civilization, bleeding and in shock, I knew that my ordeal was far from over. The attack might be done, but the real nightmare was just beginning. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I sped down the winding mountain road, each turn sending waves of pain through my battered body. The forest loomed on either side, a dark, oppressive presence that seemed to be closing in on me. Every shadow looked like it might be hiding that thing. "It's okay, Hannah. You're safe now," I muttered to myself, but the words rang hollow. The image of those burning, intelligent eyes was seared into my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. I glanced in the rearview mirror, checking for any sign of pursuit. The road behind me was empty, but that did little to calm my nerves. My breath came in short, panicked gasps as I tried to process what had just happened. "This can't be real," I said aloud, my voice shaky and unfamiliar to my own ears. "Bigfoot isn't real, it can't be." But the pain radiating through my body told a different story. I looked down at my torn shirt, now soaked with blood from the creature's claws. The sight made me dizzy, and I swerved slightly, the tires crunching on the gravel shoulder. "Focus, Hannah," I commanded myself, gripping the wheel tighter. "You need to get help." I fumbled for my phone with one hand, praying for a signal. Nothing. I was still too far out. How long had I been driving? Time seemed to have lost all meaning. Suddenly, a deafening roar cut through the air, rising above the hum of the engine. I screamed, instinctively ducking down in my seat. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the mountains. "No, no, no," I whimpered, pressing harder on the accelerator. The car lurched forward, engine protesting as I pushed it to its limits on the treacherous road. I risked a glance in the rearview mirror and my heart nearly stopped. There, emerging from the tree line, was the massive form of the creature. It was running on all fours, covering ground at an impossible speed. "This isn't happening," I gasped, but the reality was undeniable. The beast was gaining on me. I took a turn too fast, the tires squealing in protest. The forest blurred around me as I pushed the car harder, desperation overriding caution. My lungs burned as I realized I'd been holding my breath. The creature let out another ear-splitting roar, closer now. I could hear the thunderous impact of its hands and feet on the road, a rhythmic pounding that seemed to shake the very ground. "Please," I sobbed, though I wasn't sure who I was begging. "Please, just let this end." I rounded another bend and my heart leapt. Up ahead the trees thinned out, revealing a long stretch of straight road. If I could just make it there, maybe I could outrun this nightmare. But as I accelerated towards safety, a massive, fur-covered form burst from the trees directly in front of me. I screamed, yanking the wheel to the side. The car swerved violently, tires losing traction on the loose gravel. Time seemed to slow as the world spun around me. I caught a glimpse of the creature's face, twisted in a snarl of rage, and... was that triumph? Then everything went sideways as the car left the road. The impact was deafening. Metal crunched and glass shattered as the car rolled down the embankment. I was tossed around like a rag doll, each impact sending fresh waves of agony through my already battered body. When the world finally stopped spinning, I found myself hanging upside down, held in place by my seatbelt. Blood dripped into my eyes from a gash on my forehead, and every breath sent sharp pains through my chest. Broken ribs, probably. Through the shattered windshield, I could see the road above. And there, silhouetted against the sky, was the towering form of the creature. It stood there watching, its chest heaving from the chase. "Go away," I whispered, my voice barely audible even to myself. "Please, just go away." But the beast had no intention of leaving. With deliberate slowness, it began to make its way down the embankment towards the wreck of my car. Each step brought it closer, its massive form blocking out more and more of the sky. Panic gave me strength I didn't know I had. I fumbled with the seatbelt, my fingers slick with blood. Come on," I muttered, fighting against the clasp. Finally, it released, and I fell heavily onto the roof of the car. Pain exploded through my body, but I forced it aside. I had to move. Now. I crawled through the shattered driver's side window, glass cutting into my palms and knees. The creature was halfway down the embankment now, taking its time, as if savoring the hunt. Once free of the car, I struggled to my feet. Everything hurt. Standing made me dizzy, and for a moment the world swam around me. But the sight of the approaching monster cut through the haze of pain and shock. I turned and ran, or tried to. It was more of a stumbling limp, each step sending jolts of agony through my battered body. The forest loomed ahead, dark and forbidding. But it was my only chance. Behind me, I heard the creature reach my car. Metal groaned as it tore into the wreckage, searching for me. When it realized I wasn't there, it let out a roar of frustration that shook the trees. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the screaming protests of my body. The edge of the forest was just ahead. If I could make it there, maybe I could lose the creature in the dense undergrowth. But I had barely reached the first line of trees when I heard it behind me. The thunderous footsteps, the snapping of branches, the heavy breathing. It was so close. "No!" I gasped, pushing myself to run faster. My legs burned, my lungs screamed for air, but I couldn't stop. Stopping meant death. I darted between trees, ducking under low-hanging branches. Behind me, I could hear the creature crashing through the forest, demolishing everything in its path. It was toying with me, I realized. It could have caught me at any time. This was a game to it. Suddenly, my foot caught on an exposed root. I went down hard, crying out as I hit the ground. Pain exploded through my already injured body, and for a moment, the world went dark around the edges. I rolled onto my back, gasping for air. Through the canopy above, I could see patches of sky. Was this how it would end? Here on the forest floor, torn apart by a creature that shouldn't exist? The sound of heavy breathing made me turn my head. There, not 10 feet away, stood the beast. Its massive chest heaved with exertion, and its eyes... God, those eyes. They burned with an intelligence that seemed impossible for an animal. It took a step towards me, then another. I tried to move, to crawl away, but my body wouldn't respond. I was spent, utterly and completely. As the creature loomed over me, I closed my eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom," I whispered. "I'm so sorry." I waited for the killing blow, for the pain of claws tearing into me. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt a rush of air as the creature moved past me. My eyes snapped open in disbelief. The beast was walking away, disappearing into the shadows of the forest. Had it let me go? I lay there for what felt like hours, afraid to move, afraid to believe I was actually alive. Finally, when the silence of the forest became too much to bear, I slowly pushed myself up. Every movement was agony, but I forced myself to stand. I had to get out of here, I had to find help. But as I looked around at the endless sea of trees, a new fear gripped me. I was lost, injured, and alone in a forest that had just revealed its darkest secret. And somewhere out there, the creature was waiting. My nightmare was far from over. With shaking legs, I took my first step towards what I hoped was safety, the weight of my terrifying encounter heavy on my shoulders. Little did I know, the true horror of not being believed was yet to come. The forest had become a maze of shadows and terror. Every step was agony, my body a canvas of pain painted by the creature's earlier assaults. I stumbled forward, driven by a primal need to survive, to escape this nightmare that had become my reality. "Keep moving, Hannah," I whispered to myself, my voice hoarse and unfamiliar. "Just keep moving." But where was I going? The dense canopy above blocked out most of the sunlight, making it impossible to get my bearings. For all I knew, I could be walking in circles, or worse, deeper into the creature's territory. A twig snapped somewhere behind me, and I whirled around, my heart leaping into my throat. Nothing but trees and shadows. But the silence that followed was oppressive, unnatural. No birds, no insects. As if the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting. I pressed on, each step a battle against pain and exhaustion. My torn shirt clung to my body, sticky with blood and sweat. I could feel the sting of the creature's claw marks across my torso with every labored breath. Suddenly, the trees thinned out, revealing a small clearing. Hope surged through me as I recognized a fallen log. I had rested here earlier on my hike before everything went to hell. The trail couldn't be far, but as I stepped into the clearing, that hope turned to icy dread. There on the far side stood the creature. It was motionless, its massive form silhouetted against the trees, watching me with those terrifyingly intelligent eyes. "No," I breathed, stumbling backward. "Please, no." The creature's nostrils flared, and I knew it could smell my fear, my blood, Its lips pulled back in a snarl, revealing yellowed, pointed teeth. And then it charged. I turned to run, but my battered body betrayed me. I managed only a few steps before my legs gave out, sending me crashing to the ground. I rolled onto my back, desperate to keep the monster in sight. It was on me in seconds. The creature's foul odor overwhelmed me as it pinned me to the ground, its weight crushing the air from my lungs. I felt its razor-sharp claws tear into my flesh, each slash sending waves of agony through my body. I screamed, the sound raw and primal, echoing uselessly through the empty forest. My hands flailed, trying to push the beast away to protect myself, but it was like hitting a wall of muscle and fur. "Stop!" I cried out, tears streaming down my face. "Please stop!" But the creature showed no sign of understanding or mercy. Its attack was relentless, driven by a rage I couldn't comprehend. I could feel my strength ebbing away with each passing second, my vision starting to darken at the edges. In that moment, facing what I was sure was my death, a strange calm washed over me. Time seemed to slow. I became acutely aware of every sensation: the rough ground beneath me, the creature's hot breath on my face, the warm trickle of blood down my side. Then, through the haze of pain and fear, I saw it. A large rock, just within reach of my outstretched hand. With the last reserves of my strength, I grabbed it. The creature reared back for another strike, and I saw my chance. I swung the rock with all my might, connecting solidly with the side of the beast's head. The impact sent shockwaves up my arm, but it had the desired effect. The creature recoiled, letting out a roar of pain and surprise. Its weight shifted, and I seized the opportunity to roll away. Adrenaline surged through me, momentarily dulling the pain. I scrambled to my feet, swaying as a wave of dizziness washed over me. The creature shook its massive head, clearly dazed from the blow. I didn't wait to see if it would recover. I ran. My body screamed in protest with every step, but fear drove me forward. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me, but I didn't slow down. I could hear the creature behind me, its roars of rage spurring me on. I burst through a thicket and found myself on the trail. Relief flooded through me. I knew where I was now. My car couldn't be far, but the creature was closing in. I could hear its heavy footsteps thundering behind me, growing closer with each passing second. My lungs burned, my legs felt like lead, but I pushed myself harder. Just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, I saw it, the gravel parking lot where I'd left my car. It was there, just 100 yards away. Safety. With a final burst of energy, I sprinted towards it. The sound of splintering wood behind me told me the creature had burst onto the trail. It was right behind me. I reached the car, fumbling with shaking hands for my keys. Come on," I muttered, panic rising in my throat as I heard the creature's approach. The key slid into the lock, and I yanked the door open, throwing myself inside. I slammed it shut just as a massive form burst from the tree line. The beast charged towards the car, its roars of fury muffled by the closed windows. I jammed the key into the ignition, turning it with a prayer on my lips. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into reverse just as the creature reached us. Its massive fist slammed into the hood, leaving a huge dent. The windshield cracked as it pounded on the glass, its snarling face inches away from mine. Screaming, I floored the accelerator. The tires spun on the gravel before finding purchase, and the car shot backward. The sudden movement caused the beast to lose its grip, and it fell away. I spun the wheel, shifting into drive. As I sped away, I caught one last glimpse of the creature in my rearview mirror. It stood at the edge of the forest, watching me go. Even from a distance, I could feel the weight of its gaze. As the forest receded behind me, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by waves of pain and nausea. My vision blurred, and I struggled to keep the car on the road. I needed help. I needed a hospital. But as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in, a new fear took hold. Who would believe me? Who would believe that I had been attacked by a creature that wasn't supposed to exist? I glanced down at my torn and bloodied clothes, at the deep claw marks visible through the shredded fabric. Would this be enough evidence? Or would they find some way to explain it away, to deny the impossible truth? As I sped toward civilization, bleeding and in shock, I knew that my ordeal was far from over. The attack might be done, but the real nightmare, the struggle to be believed, to make sense of what had happened, was just beginning. The lights of the town appeared in the distance, a beacon of hope and normalcy. But as I drew closer, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leaving one world of terror only to enter another. A world where the truth would be my enemy, where my sanity would be questioned, where the memory of those burning, intelligent eyes would haunt my every waking moment. I took a deep, shuddering breath, wincing at the pain in my ribs. Whatever came next, I had survived. I had faced the impossible and lived. Now, I just had to find a way to live with the knowledge of what lurked in the shadows of the forest. With trembling hands, I steered the car towards the hospital, bracing myself for the disbelief and skepticism I knew was coming. The battle for my life might be over, but the battle for the truth was about to begin. The world outside my car window blurred as I sped down the mountain road, each curve sending waves of pain through my battered body. The adrenaline that had kept me going was fading fast, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion and searing agony from my wounds. I could feel warm blood seeping through my torn shirt, a constant reminder of the nightmare I'd just escaped. "Stay awake, Hannah," I muttered to myself, my voice barely audible over the rattling of the damaged car. "You're almost there, just stay awake." The forest that had once seemed so inviting now loomed menacingly on either side of the road. Every shadow, every movement in my peripheral vision made me flinch. I couldn't shake the feeling that at any moment that thing might burst out of the trees and finish what it started. As I rounded a bend, the trees finally began to thin out, revealing the lights of civilization in the distance. The sight of the small town nestled in the valley below should have been comforting, but instead, it filled me with a new kind of dread. How could I possibly explain what had happened to me? I glanced down at my torn and bloodied clothes, at the deep claw marks visible through the shredded fabric. Would anyone believe me? Or would they think I was crazy, making up stories about a creature that couldn't possibly exist? The first buildings of the town came into view, and I realized I had no idea where I was going. I needed a hospital, that much was clear. But the thought of facing people, of trying to explain the unexplainable, made me hesitate. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and the car swerved dangerously. I gripped the wheel tighter, forcing myself to focus. I didn't have a choice. I needed help, and I needed it now. I spotted a sign for the local hospital and turned onto the street, my movements sluggish and uncoordinated. The emergency room entrance loomed ahead, a beacon of hope and uncertainty. As I pulled into the parking lot, my vision began to blur. The pain that I'd been holding at bay crashed over me in full force. I managed to put the car in park before slumping forward, my forehead resting on the steering wheel. "Help," I whispered, though there was no one to hear me. "Please, someone help me." A sharp tap on the window made me jerk upright, sending fresh waves of agony through my body. A concerned face peered in at me, a man in scrubs, probably alerted by my erratic driving. "Ma'am, are you all right?" His voice was muffled through the glass. With trembling hands, I fumbled for the door handle. As it swung open, I saw the man's eyes widen in shock at my appearance. "Oh my God," he breathed. "What happened to you?" I tried to speak, to explain, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, a sob escaped my lips as the full weight of what I'd been through crashed down on me. I was attacked," I managed to choke out. "In the forest. It was... But I couldn't finish the sentence. How could I possibly describe what I'd seen, what I'd experienced? The man, a nurse I realized, was already calling for help. Within moments, I was surrounded by medical staff, their voices a blur of urgent commands and concerned questions. Multiple lacerations, possible internal injuries, severe blood loss. I felt myself being lifted onto a gurney, the movement sending fresh spikes of pain through my body. As they wheeled me into the emergency room, the harsh fluorescent lights made the world swim around me. "Can you tell us what happened?" A doctor leaned over me, her face a mask of professional concern. "Were you hiking? Did you encounter a bear?" Not a bear," I mumbled, fighting to stay conscious. "It was bigger. Stood like a man, but not human. Please, you have to believe me. It's still out there." I saw the doctor exchange a glance with a nurse, their expressions a mix of concern and skepticism. "She's in shock," the doctor said quietly. "Let's focus on treating her injuries for now." As they began cutting away my ruined clothes, I tried again to make them understand. "You don't understand," I insisted, my voice weak. "It was BigFoot. I know how it sounds, but it's true. It attacked me. You have to warn people." The medical staff around me fell silent for a moment. Then the doctor patted my hand gently. "Don't worry about that now," she said soothingly. "We're going to take care of you. Just try to relax." But I couldn't relax. Even as they began treating my wounds, even as the pain medication they administered began to dull my senses, I couldn't shake the terror that gripped me. They didn't believe me. No one would believe me. Time seemed to lose all meaning as I drifted in and out of consciousness. I was vaguely aware of being moved, of tests being run, of hushed conversations just out of earshot. Through it all, the memory of those intelligent, rage-filled eyes haunted me. When I finally came fully awake, I found myself in a hospital room. The pain had dulled to a persistent ache, and I could feel the pull of stitches across my torso and arms. A steady beeping from a nearby machine matched the throbbing in my head. A nurse entered the room, smiling when she saw I was awake. "How are you feeling?" she asked, checking my vitals. "Like I was hit by a truck," I croaked, my throat dry and scratchy. "How long have I been here?" "About 12 hours, she replied. "You were in pretty rough shape when you came in. The doctor will be by soon to talk to you about your injuries." I nodded, then hesitated. Did anyone call the police? About what attacked me?" The nurse's smile faltered slightly. "The doctor thought it best to wait until you were more coherent. You were saying some pretty unusual things when you arrived." I felt a surge of frustration and fear. "I know what I saw," I insisted. "It wasn't a bear or a mountain lion. It was something else." The nurse patted my hand, much like the doctor had earlier. "I'm sure it was very frightening," she said gently. "But you're safe now. Try not to worry about it." As she left the room, I felt tears of frustration welling up in my eyes. They thought I was crazy or delirious. But I knew what I had seen, what had attacked me. The creature was real, and it was still out there. I closed my eyes, trying to calm my racing thoughts. But every time I did, I saw those terrifying eyes, felt those claws tearing into my flesh. How could I make them understand? How could I convince them of the danger lurking in the forest? As I lay there, surrounded by the sterile comfort of the hospital room, I realized that my ordeal was far from over. The physical wounds would heal, but the real battle, the fight to be believed, to make sense of what had happened, was just beginning. And somewhere out there, in the depths of the forest, the creature was waiting for its next victim, for someone else to stumble into its territory. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I had survived the attack, but now I faced a different kind of struggle. A struggle against disbelief, against the rational world's refusal to accept the impossible. As I steeled myself for the conversations to come, for the questioning and the doubt, one thought kept running through my mind. The monster in the forest was real, and I was the only one who knew the truth. The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room made the claw marks on my body look even more gruesome and unreal. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of the nightmare I had lived through. Every beep of the heart monitor, every rustle of the starched sheets reminded me that I was alive, a fact that seemed miraculous given what I had faced in those woods. A soft knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. A man in a white coat entered, his face a mask of professional concern. "Ms. Green, I'm Dr. Ramirez. How are you feeling?" he asked, picking up my chart. "Like I've been mauled by a... I trailed off, unsure how to finish that sentence without sounding insane. Dr. Ramirez nodded sympathetically. "You've been through quite an ordeal. The lacerations on your body are extensive, and you have several broken ribs. Can you tell me what happened?" I took a deep breath, wincing at the pain in my chest. This was it. The moment of truth. "I was hiking in the national forest," I began, my voice shaky. "Everything was fine until I was attacked." "By a bear?" Dr. Ramirez prompted gently. I shook my head. "No, not a bear. It was bigger. It walked on 2 legs, it had hands, not paws. And its eyes..." I shuddered at the memory. Its eyes were almost human. Dr. Ramirez's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Doubt? Concern? "Ms. Green, Hannah," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "You've been through a traumatic experience. Sometimes, in moments of extreme stress, our minds can play tricks on us." "No," I said firmly, struggling to sit up. "I know what I saw. It was BigFoot. I know how that sounds, but it's the truth." Dr. Ramirez placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, easing me back down. "Hannah, you've suffered a significant blood loss and trauma. It's not uncommon for patients in your condition to experience confusion or unusual perceptions." I felt a surge of frustration. "I'm not confused," I insisted. "I'm not hallucinating. It was real. You have to believe me." "What's important now is your recovery," Dr. Ramirez said, neatly sidestepping my plea. "We'll need to keep you here for a few days for observation and to prevent infection. Is there anyone you'd like us to call for you?" I shook my head, feeling suddenly very alone. "No, I live alone. My parents are on a cruise in Alaska. They won't be back for weeks." Dr. Ramirez made a note on my chart. "All right, try to get some rest. A nurse will be in shortly to check your vitals." As he turned to leave, I called out, "Doctor, what about the police? Shouldn't someone warn people about what's out there?" He paused at the door, his expression unreadable. "Let's focus on your recovery for now, Hannah. We can discuss the rest later." After he left, I lay back, tears of frustration welling in my eyes. They didn't believe me. Of course they didn't. Who would? The day dragged on, a parade of nurses and orderlies coming and going. Each time I tried to explain what had really happened, I was met with the same patronizing smiles and gentle deflections. As evening fell, casting long shadows across my room, a new nurse came in to check on me. She was younger than the others, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "How are you doing, Hannah?" she asked, checking my IV. "Physically or mentally?" I replied, a bitter edge to my voice. She looked at me for a long moment, then sat down in the chair beside my bed. "Both, I suppose." Something in her tone made me look at her more closely. Do you believe me?" The nurse, her name tag read Emily, glanced at the door before leaning in. "I grew up around here," she said softly. "My grandfather used to tell stories about something in the woods, something that wasn't a bear or a mountain lion." Hope surged through me. "You've heard of it? The creature?" Emily nodded slowly. "I've never seen it myself, but there are stories. Hikers gone missing, strange sounds in the night. Most people write it off as legends or campfire tales, but it's real," I finished for her. "I saw it. It attacked me." "I believe you," Emily said, and those 3 words were like a balm to my battered spirit. "But Hannah, you need to be careful who you tell. People around here, they don't like to talk about it. It's bad for tourism, bad for the town's image." I felt a chill run down my spine. Are you saying I should keep quiet about what happened? Emily shook her head. I'm saying you should be prepared for people not to believe you, to question your sanity even. As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. A man in a sheriff's uniform entered, his face stern. Ms. Green, I'm Sheriff Tanner. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your incident in the forest. Emily stood up, giving my hand a quick, reassuring squeeze before leaving the room. The sheriff took her place, pulling out a notebook. Now, Ms. Green, can you tell me exactly what happened out there? I took a deep breath, steeling myself. This was my chance to make someone in authority understand the danger. I was hiking on the Pine Ridge Trail, I began, my voice stronger than I expected. It was early afternoon. I heard something behind me, and when I turned, I described the creature in as much detail as I could remember. Its massive size, the matted fur, those terrifyingly intelligent eyes. I told him about the chase, the attack, my desperate escape. Throughout my account, Sheriff Tanner's expression remained impassive. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Ms. Green, he said finally, his tone carefully neutral. Are you aware that making false reports is a serious offense? I felt like I'd been slapped. False? What? No, I'm telling you the truth. The sheriff sighed, closing his notebook. Look, I understand you've been through a traumatic experience. But Bigfoot? Really? We don't have time or resources to chase fairy tales. It's not a fairy tale, I protested, my voice rising. It's out there. It's dangerous. You have to warn people. What we have to do, Sheriff Tanner said firmly, is figure out what really happened to you. Now, is there anything else you'd like to add to your statement? Anything more realistic? I slumped back against my pillows, suddenly exhausted. No, I whispered. There's nothing else. The sheriff nodded, standing up. Get some rest, Ms. Green. We'll be in touch if we need any more information. As he left, I felt a wave of despair wash over me. They didn't believe me. Worse, they thought I was lying or crazy. How could I make them understand the danger lurking in those woods? I turned my head to look out the window. Night had fallen, and I could see the dark line of the forest on the horizon. Somewhere out there, the creature was still roaming free, and I was the only one who knew the truth. As I drifted off into an uneasy sleep, one thought kept circling in my mind. The real nightmare wasn't over. It was just beginning. The morning light filtering through the hospital window did little to lift my spirits. I'd spent a restless night, plagued by nightmares of massive, fur-covered hands reaching for me in the darkness. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those terrifyingly intelligent eyes staring back at me. A gentle knock on the door roused me from my troubled thoughts. Sheriff Tanner entered, his face a mask of professional detachment. Behind him was a man I didn't recognize, dressed in khaki pants and a Forest Service shirt. Ms. Green, the sheriff began, his tone carefully neutral. This is Ranger Mike Collins from the National Forest Service. He'd like to ask you a few questions about your incident. I nodded warily, pushing myself up in the bed. The movement sent a jolt of pain through my battered body, a stark reminder of the very real danger I'd faced. Ranger Collins stepped forward, his expression a mix of concern and skepticism. Ms. Green, I understand you had a frightening experience in the forest. Can you walk me through what happened? I took a deep breath, steeling myself. This was my chance to make them understand, to convince them of the danger lurking in those woods. I was hiking on the Pine Ridge Trail, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. It was early afternoon. The trail was deserted. I heard something behind me, and when I turned, I described the creature in as much detail as I could remember. Its massive size, the matted fur, those unnervingly human-like eyes. I told them about the chase, the attack, my desperate escape. Throughout my account, I watched their faces, searching for any sign of belief. When I finished, There was a long moment of silence. Ranger Collins exchanged a glance with Sheriff Tanner before speaking. "Ms. Green," he said carefully, "I've been working these forests for over 20 years. I've seen bear attacks, mountain lion encounters, even the occasional wolf. But what you're describing, it doesn't match any known wildlife in this area." "Because it wasn't wildlife," I insisted, frustration bubbling up inside me. "I know what I saw. It was Bigfoot. I know how that sounds, but it's the truth." Sheriff Tanner sighed, his pen tapping impatiently against his notepad. "Hannah, we understand you've been through a traumatic experience, but making claims about mythical creatures isn't helping us figure out what really happened to you." I felt tears of frustration welling up in my eyes. "I'm not making claims. I'm telling you what happened. Why won't you believe me?" Ranger Collins stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. "We want to believe you, Hannah, but we need evidence. Can you show us exactly where this attack took place?" I hesitated. The thought of going back into those woods sent a shiver of fear down my spine. But if it meant they might finally believe me? "Yes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I can show you." An hour later, against the advice of my doctors, I found myself in a Forest Service vehicle, heading back towards the scene of my nightmare. Every mile that brought us closer to those woods made my heart race faster. We parked at the trailhead where my car had been towed from. As we stepped out, the looming presence of the forest seemed to press in on me from all sides. "This way," I said, pointing down the trail. My legs felt weak as I took the first steps back into the wilderness that had nearly claimed my life. We hiked for about an hour, my body protesting with every step. Finally, we reached the clearing where the attack had taken place. "It was here," I said, my voice shaking. "This is where it grabbed me." Ranger Collins and Sheriff Tanner spread out, examining the area closely. I watched with growing desperation as they found nothing. No massive footprints, no tufts of fur, no signs of the violent struggle that had taken place. "I don't understand," I muttered, looking around wildly. "There should be signs." It threw me against that tree there. Its claws tore up the ground here. But the forest floor was undisturbed, save for our own footprints. The tree I pointed to showed no signs of impact. Sheriff Tanner's voice was heavy with disappointment and a hint of annoyance. "Ms. Green, there's no evidence here of any kind of attack, let alone an encounter with a Bigfoot." "But it happened," I cried, my voice echoing through the trees. "I'm not lying, I'm not crazy, it was right here." Ranger Collins placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Hannah, sometimes when we experience trauma, our minds can play tricks on us. It's possible that in your fear and pain you might have—" "No." I jerked away from his touch. "I know what I saw, what I felt. Its claws tearing into me, its breath on my face, it was real." But even as I said it, doubt began to creep in. How could there be no evidence? Had I imagined it all? No. The wounds on my body were real. The terror I felt was real. As we made our way back to the vehicle, I could feel the weight of their skepticism pressing down on me. They thought I was delusional, or worse, lying. How could I make them understand the danger when I had no proof to offer? Back at the hospital, Dr. Ramirez was waiting, his face a mask of concern and disappointment. "Hannah," he said gently, "I understand you went back to the forest today, against medical advice." I nodded, too exhausted and disheartened to argue. "I'm worried about you," he continued. "Your physical wounds are healing, but this fixation on a mythical creature attack, it's not healthy. I'd like you to speak with one of our psychiatrists." "I'm not crazy," I whispered, but the words sounded hollow even to my own ears. As Dr. Ramirez left, I turned to stare out the window. The forest loomed on the horizon, dark and impenetrable. Somewhere out there I knew the creature was waiting. Real or imagined, the terror it inspired was undeniable. I closed my eyes, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. They didn't believe me. No one believed me. And without evidence, how could I ever prove what I'd experienced? As night fell, casting long shadows across my room, I realized that my ordeal was far from over. The physical wounds would heal, but the psychological scars and the knowledge of what lurked in those woods would haunt me forever. And somewhere out there, in the depths of the forest, the creature remained, waiting, watching, ready to strike again. And I was the only one who knew the truth. The hospital room felt suffocating as I sat on the edge of the bed, my legs dangling over the side. The doctor had just cleared me for discharge, but the thought of leaving the relative safety of these sterile walls filled me with dread. Outside, the world waited, a world that didn't believe me, that thought I was either lying or insane. A soft knock on the door interrupted my brooding. Sarah, my best friend who had rushed back from her business trip upon hearing about my accident, poked her head in. "Hey, Hannah, ready to go?" Her voice was gentle, cautious, as if speaking to a frightened animal. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As I gathered my few belongings, I could feel Sarah's concerned gaze on me. She had been here yesterday when I'd tried to explain what had really happened in the forest. The memory of her skeptical expression still stung. We walked out of the hospital in silence, the bright sunlight making me squint. Every shadow, every movement in my peripheral vision made me flinch. The forest loomed in the distance, a dark line on the horizon that seemed to mock me with its secrets. In the car, Sarah finally broke the silence. "Hannah, I'm worried about you." I turned to look at her, seeing the genuine concern in her eyes. "I know what I saw, Sarah. I'm not crazy." She sighed, her hands tightening on the steering wheel. "I'm not saying you're crazy, but honey, Bigfoot, don't you think that maybe in all the fear and pain your mind might have, I don't know, created something to make sense of what happened? Created the claw marks on my body?" I snapped, immediately regretting my harsh tone. "I'm sorry, I don't know how to make anyone understand." Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand. "It's okay. Let's just focus on getting you home and settled, all right?" As we drove through town, I couldn't help but notice the sidelong glances from people on the street. News traveled fast in a small town like this. I wondered what version of events they had heard. At my apartment, Sarah helped me inside, fussing over me as I settled onto the couch. The familiar surroundings should have been comforting, but instead they felt alien, as if they belonged to a different life. A life before I knew what lurked in the shadows of the forest. "Do you want me to stay?" Sarah asked, hovering uncertainly. I shook my head. "No, I'll be fine. Thanks for everything, Sarah." After she left, the silence of the apartment pressed in on me. I turned on the TV for background noise, but nothing could drown out the thoughts swirling in my head. I found myself drawn to my laptop, opening it with shaking hands. Maybe if I could find similar stories, other encounters, it would help me make sense of what had happened, help me prove I wasn't alone in this. Hours slipped by as I scoured the internet, reading account after account of Bigfoot sightings and encounters. Some seemed credible, others were clearly hoaxes. But none matched the terrifying reality of what I had experienced. A knock at the door made me jump, my heart racing. It was probably just Sarah checking up on me, but for a moment, I imagined the creature somehow finding me here, coming to finish what it had started. "Hannah? It's Dr. Ramirez. May I come in?" I hesitated, then called out, "It's open." Dr. Ramirez entered, his face a mask of professional concern. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I wanted to see how you were settling in at home." I gestured for him to sit, closing my laptop. "I'm fine, just trying to process everything." He nodded, his eyes taking in the cluttered coffee table, the untouched food Sarah had left. "That's understandable. Trauma can be difficult to cope with. Have you given any thought to speaking with the psychiatrist I recommended?" I felt a flare of frustration. I don't need a psychiatrist. I need people to believe me. Dr. Ramirez leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. Hannah, I've reviewed your case thoroughly. The injuries you sustained are consistent with a fall, possibly exacerbated by an encounter with a large animal. But there's no evidence to support, well, what you believe happened. No evidence except my testimony, I countered. Doctor, I know what I saw, what I experienced. It wasn't a bear or a mountain lion, it was something else. He sighed, rubbing his forehead. I understand you believe that. But Hannah, continuing to insist on this, it's not healthy. It could impact your recovery, your relationships, your whole life. I stood up, pacing the small living room. So what? I'm just supposed to pretend it didn't happen? Ignore the danger that's out there? I'm saying that perhaps it's time to consider that your memory of the event might not be entirely accurate, Dr. Ramirez said carefully. Trauma can do strange things to our minds. It's possible that in your fear and pain, your brain created a scenario to help you cope. I stopped by the window looking out at the forest in the distance. And the claw marks? The specific injuries, did my mind create those too? Dr. Ramirez stood, moving to stand beside me. Animal attacks can be brutal and frightening. It's not uncommon for victims to misremember or exaggerate details. I turned to face him, feeling a mix of desperation and determination. I'm not misremembering or exaggerating. It happened, it was real, and it's still out there. The doctor's expression softened. Hannah, I know this is difficult, but holding on to this belief, it's only going to hurt you in the long run. Please consider speaking with the psychiatrist. If not for yourself, then for the people who care about you. As he left, his words echoed in my mind. Was I hurting the people who cared about me? Sarah's worried face flashed in my memory, but how could I let go of what I knew to be true? I turned back to the window, my eyes drawn to the dark line of the forest on the horizon. Somewhere out there, the creature was still roaming free. Real or imagined, the terror it inspired was undeniable. As night fell, casting long shadows across my living room, I realized that my ordeal was far from over. The physical wounds would heal, but the psychological scars, and the knowledge of what lurked in those woods, would haunt me forever. I picked up my phone, my finger hovering over Sarah's number. Maybe I did need help. Not to forget or deny what had happened, but to find a way to live with the truth that no one else seemed willing to accept. As I pressed call, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a long and lonely battle, not just against the disbelief of others, but against my own doubts and fears. The morning light filtered through my bedroom curtains, rousing me from a fitful sleep plagued by nightmares of massive fur-covered hands reaching for me in the darkness. I sat up, wincing at the pain that still radiated through my body, a constant reminder of the ordeal I had survived. As I made my way to the kitchen, my eyes were drawn to the forest visible through the window. It loomed in the distance, a dark, forbidding presence that seemed to mock me with its secrets. I shuddered, turning away from the view. My phone buzzed on the counter, another message from Sarah. She had been checking in constantly since I'd been discharged from the hospital. I appreciated her concern, but her skepticism about what had really happened in those woods was becoming harder to bear. I picked up the phone, reading her message. Hey, how are you feeling today? Want me to come over? I hesitated, then typed out a reply. I'm okay. Actually thinking of going for a drive. Clear my head. Her response was almost immediate. Are you sure that's a good idea? Maybe I should come with you. No, I'll be fine, I assured her. Just need some time alone. I'll call you later. I set the phone down, ignoring the flurry of concerned messages that followed. I knew Sarah meant well, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was suffocating under the weight of everyone's disbelief and worry. Before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed my car keys and headed out. The cool morning air hit me as I stepped outside, making me shiver. Or was it the memory of what lurked in the nearby wilderness that sent chills down my spine? As I drove, I found myself drawn inexorably towards the outskirts of town, towards the forest that had been the site of my nightmare. I knew it was foolish, perhaps even dangerous, but I couldn't resist the pull. I needed something. Closure? Proof? I wasn't sure. I parked at the trailhead where it had all begun, my hands shaking slightly as I turned off the engine. The forest stretched out before me, quiet and seemingly peaceful in the morning light. But I knew better now. I knew what secrets it held. "You can do this, Hannah," I muttered to myself, taking a deep breath. "Just a quick look. You don't even have to go far in." With trembling legs, I stepped out of the car and approached the trail. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig made me flinch. But I pressed on, driven by a need I couldn't fully explain. As I walked, memories of that fateful day flooded back. The initial peace of the hike, the sudden terror of the attack, the desperate flight through these very woods. My heart raced and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see a massive, fur-covered form emerging from the trees. After about half an hour, I reached the clearing where the worst of the attack had taken place. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. It looked so normal, peaceful even. There was no sign of the violent struggle that had occurred here, no evidence of the creature that had nearly ended my life. "This is where it happened," I said aloud, my voice sounding small and fragile in the vast forest. "Right here. It was real. I know it was real." But as I looked around, doubt began to creep in. How could there be no trace? No broken branches, no disturbed earth, nothing to corroborate my story? A twig snapped somewhere behind me and I whirled around, my heart leaping into my throat. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. No response, just the usual sounds of the forest. I took a step back, suddenly acutely aware of how vulnerable I was out here alone. What had I been thinking? Coming back to this place. As I turned to hurry back to the trail, something caught my eye. There, partially hidden by a fallen log, was a tuft of something. My heart racing, I approached cautiously and knelt down to examine it. It was fur, coarse, matted fur, unlike anything I'd seen before. With shaking hands, I reached out to touch it. It felt real, tangible. Proof. "I knew it," I whispered, a mix of vindication and fear washing over me. "I knew you were real." A distant roar echoed through the forest, sending birds scattering from the trees. It was a sound I had hoped never to hear again, a sound that haunted my nightmares. Panic seized me. I scrambled to my feet, the tuft of fur clutched tightly in my hand, and ran. I ran as I had never run before, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me at every step. But I didn't slow down. I couldn't. I burst out of the tree line, gasping for air, my legs burning with exertion. My car sat where I had left it, a beacon of safety. I fumbled with the keys, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds, half expecting to see the creature emerging from the forest. As I sped away from the trailhead, my mind raced. I had proof now. Tangible evidence that what I had experienced was real. But would it be enough? Would anyone believe me? I pulled over at a scenic overlook, my hands shaking too badly to drive safely. I opened my palm, staring at the tuft of fur. It was real. It was here. But even as relief washed over me, a new fear took hold. If the creature was real, if it was still out there, then others were in danger. Hikers, campers, anyone who ventured into those woods unaware of the threat that lurked within. And I was the only one who knew the truth. I pulled out my phone, dialing Sarah's number. As it rang, I stared out at the forest, stretching out below the overlook. Somewhere in those trees, a monster roamed free, and I was the only one who could warn people about it. "Hannah?" Sarah's worried voice came through the speaker. "Where are you? Are you okay?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation to come. "Sarah, I need you to listen to me. I can prove it now. What happened to me, what's out there in the forest, it's all real, and we need to do something about it." As I began to explain, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in my nightmare. The creature was real, and now I had proof. But would it be enough to make anyone believe me? And more importantly, would it be enough to protect others from the terror that lurked in the shadows of the forest? The sun was setting as I sat in my living room, the tuft of coarse matted fur clutched tightly in my hand. It had been hours since my impulsive return to the forest, hours since I'd found this small piece of evidence that validated my terrifying experience. But instead of feeling relieved or vindicated, I felt more alone than ever. Sarah had listened to my frantic explanation over the phone, her initial concern giving way to thinly veiled skepticism. "Hannah," she had said gently, "I think you need to talk to someone, a professional. This obsession isn't healthy." Her words echoed in my mind, mingling with the disbelief of the doctors, the sheriff, and everyone else who had dismissed my account of what happened in those woods. Even with this tangible proof in my hand, I knew they wouldn't believe me. They'd find some way to explain it away, to deny the impossible truth I had faced. I stood up, wincing at the pain that still radiated through my body, and walked to the window. The forest loomed on the horizon, a dark, impenetrable wall in the fading light. Somewhere out there, the creature was still roaming free. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, another message from Sarah. I ignored it, unable to face her concern and disbelief right now. Instead, I found myself drawn to my laptop, opening it with shaking hands. For hours, I scoured the internet, searching for similar accounts, for anyone who might have experienced what I had. There were countless Bigfoot sightings, blurry photos, and questionable footprint casts. But nothing came close to the visceral terror of my encounter. As the night deepened, my eyes grew heavy, but I couldn't bring myself to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those terrifyingly intelligent eyes staring back at me, felt those massive hands reaching for me in the darkness. A sudden knock at the door made me jump, my heart racing. For a wild moment, I imagined the creature somehow finding me here, coming to finish what it had started in the forest. "Hannah, it's me, open up." Sarah's voice. I hesitated, then slowly made my way to the door, opening it just a crack. Sarah stood there, her face a mask of concern. "I've been trying to reach you for hours. I was worried." I stepped back, letting her in. She took in my disheveled appearance, the dark circles under my eyes, the laptop open to yet another Bigfoot conspiracy site. "Oh, Hannah," she sighed, her voice heavy with worry. "What are you doing to yourself?" "I'm trying to find the truth," I said, my voice hoarse from disuse, "to make sense of what happened to me." Sarah sat down on the couch, patting the spot next to her. I joined her reluctantly, still clutching the tuft of fur in my hand. "Hannah, I know you believe what you experienced was real," she began carefully. "But don't you think it's possible that in all the fear and trauma, your mind might have created something to make sense of it all?" I opened my hand, showing her the fur. "Does this look like something my mind created?" Sarah examined it, her brow furrowed. "It's unusual. But Hannah, it could be from any number of animals. It doesn't prove anything." "You don't understand," I said, frustration bubbling up inside me. "I know what I saw, what I felt. Its breath on my face, its claws tearing into me. It was real, Sarah. And it's still out there." Sarah reached out, taking my hand in hers. "I believe that you believe it's real. But honey, this obsession, it's not healthy. You haven't been sleeping, you're not eating properly. You need help." "What I need is for someone to believe me," I snapped, pulling my hand away. "There's a dangerous creature out there, and I'm the only one who knows about it, don't you see? I have to do something." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her eyes filled with a sadness that made my heart ache. "What exactly do you think you can do, Hannah? Even if what you're saying is true, which I'm not saying it is, but if it were, what then? You can't go back into those woods. You can't hunt this thing down yourself." Her words hit me like a physical blow. She was right. What could I do? I was just one person, traumatized and disbelieved, up against something that shouldn't even exist. I don't know, I whispered, feeling suddenly very small and very tired. I can't pretend it didn't happen. I can't go back to my normal life knowing what's out there. Sarah pulled me into a hug, and I felt tears I didn't know I'd been holding back start to fall. It's okay, she murmured, stroking my hair. We'll figure this out together, but first you need to rest, to heal. As she held me, I felt some of the tension that had been coiled inside me since the attack start to unwind. But even as exhaustion began to overtake me, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Sarah helped me to bed, promising to stay the night. As I drifted off into an uneasy sleep, my eyes fell on the window. The forest was a dark presence on the horizon, holding its secrets close. In my dreams, I was back in those woods, running from something I couldn't see but could feel pursuing me. Its roars echoed through the trees, getting closer and closer. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I woke with a start, my heart pounding. The room was dark, the first hints of dawn just beginning to lighten the sky. Sarah slept on the couch in the living room, her soft snores a comforting reminder that I wasn't alone. But as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I knew that in many ways I was alone. No one else had seen what I had seen, felt what I had felt. No one else knew the truth about what lurked in those woods. The physical wounds would heal. The scars would fade. But the memory of those intelligent, rage-filled eyes, the knowledge of the danger that still roamed free, that would stay with me forever. As the sun rose, casting long shadows across my room, I made a silent vow. I might not be able to convince others of what I'd experienced, but I would never forget. And somehow, someday, I would find a way to protect others from the terror that waited in the shadows of the forest. The nightmare might be over, but the real battle, the battle to be believed, to make sense of the impossible, was just beginning. I never thought a simple hiking trip would change my life forever. My name is Steve Williams, and I'm an avid outdoorsman from Seattle. I've always loved exploring the wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, but nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered in Olympic National Park that fateful day. It was a crisp morning in late September when I set out on what was supposed to be a 3-day solo hike. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth as I shouldered my backpack and headed for the trailhead. I remember feeling a sense of excitement, mixed with the usual caution that comes with venturing into the backcountry alone. "Be safe out there, sir," the park ranger said as he checked my permit. "We've had some reports of increased bear activity in the area. Make sure to store your food properly." I nodded, patting the bear canister strapped to my pack. "Will do. I've dealt with bears before. Nothing to worry about." If only I had known then how wrong I was. The first few hours of the hike were uneventful. The trail wound through ancient forests, massive trees towering overhead like silent sentinels. I paused occasionally to take in the breathtaking views or snap a photo of an interesting plant or rock formation. It was peaceful, the kind of solitude I craved after weeks of stress at work. As the day wore on, I noticed the forest growing denser, the canopy above thickening until it seemed to swallow the sunlight. An eerie gloom settled over the path, and I found myself checking my GPS more frequently, reassuring myself that I was still on track. It was late afternoon when I first felt it, that prickling sensation at the back of my neck, like I was being watched. I paused, scanning the undergrowth around me. The forest had gone unnaturally quiet, no birdsong or chattering squirrels, just an oppressive silence that seemed to press in from all sides. "Hello?" I called out, immediately feeling foolish. Who did I expect to answer in this remote wilderness? A twig snapped somewhere to my left, and I whirled around, heart pounding. But there was nothing there, just shadows and trees. "Get a grip, Steve," I muttered to myself, shaking off the unease. "It's probably just a deer." I pushed on, trying to shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. The trail began to climb, and I focused on my breathing. on the rhythm of my boots against the earth. Anything to distract from the growing sense of dread in the pit of my stomach. As dusk approached, I knew I needed to find a suitable campsite. The guidebook had mentioned a small clearing about a mile ahead, and I picked up my pace, not wanting to set up camp in the dark. I reached the clearing just as the last rays of sunlight were fading from the sky. It was a small space, maybe 30 feet across, surrounded by towering firs. A perfect spot to hunker down for the night. With practiced efficiency, I set up my tent and gathered wood for a small fire. As the flames flickered to life, I felt some of my earlier unease melt away. I heated up a freeze-dried meal and sat back, listening to the crackling of the fire and the distant hooting of an owl. "See?" I said aloud, chuckling at my own paranoia. "Nothing to worry about out here." But as I was about to take another bite of my dinner, a sound froze me in place. It was faint at first, barely audible over the popping of the fire. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I set down my food, straining my ears. There it was again. Louder this time. Definitely not a bear or a cougar. This was something different. Something primal and terrifying that set every nerve in my body on edge. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice shaking slightly. "Is someone there?" Silence answered me, broken only by the pounding of my own heart. I reached for my flashlight, flicking it on and sweeping the beam across the tree line. The light caught something, a flash of movement just beyond the clearing. I focused the beam, and for a split second I saw it. A massive, dark silhouette, far too large to be human, yet unmistakably bipedal. It was there and gone in an instant, melting back into the shadows with impossible speed for something so big. "What the hell?" I whispered, scrambling to my feet. The fire suddenly seemed pitifully small, its warm glow no match for the darkness pressing in around me. I grabbed my bear spray from my pack, holding it in a white-knuckled grip as I scanned the forest edge. The silence was deafening now, broken only by my ragged breathing. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. I stood there, rooted to the spot, every muscle tense and ready to spring into action. But nothing happened. No more growls, no more movement in the shadows. Eventually, exhaustion began to overtake fear. I hadn't slept well the night before, too excited about the trip, and the day's hike had taken its toll. I needed rest if I was going to be alert tomorrow. With great reluctance, I retreated to my tent, zipping myself inside. I lay there, fully clothed, bear spray clutched to my chest like a child's teddy bear. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the creak of a branch, sent a fresh wave of adrenaline through my system. "It's nothing," I kept telling myself. "Just your imagination running wild. There's no such thing as—" I couldn't even bring myself to say it. The word BigFoot felt ridiculous, childish. I was a grown man, for God's sake. A rational, educated person who didn't believe in cryptids or monsters. And yet, the image of that massive silhouette kept replaying in my mind. The sound of that inhuman growl echoed in my ears. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and filled with nightmares. I dreamed of being chased through endless dark forests, always just one step ahead of something huge and terrifying that I could never quite see. I awoke with a start, disoriented and drenched in sweat. The pre-dawn light was just beginning to filter through the tent fabric. For a moment I lay there, trying to convince myself that the events of the previous evening had been nothing more than a particularly vivid nightmare. But as I unzipped the tent and peered out into the misty morning, I knew with chilling certainty that it had been all too real. And somehow, I knew that the true nightmare was only just beginning. Little did I know, as I emerged from my tent into the cool morning air, that in just a few short hours my life would be forever changed. The horrors that awaited me in those ancient forests would haunt me for the rest of my days, leaving me with scars, both physical and psychological, that would never truly heal. But for now, as I began to break camp and prepare for another day of hiking, I was still blissfully unaware of the terror that lurked just beyond the trees, watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The day had been uneventful, almost mundane, after the unsettling experiences of the previous night. I'd hiked further into Olympic National Park, trying to convince myself that what I'd seen and heard was just a product of an overactive imagination. By the time dusk fell, I'd almost succeeded. I set up camp in a small clearing, similar to the one from the night before. As I went through the motions of pitching my tent and gathering firewood, I couldn't shake a nagging feeling of déjà vu. The forest seemed quieter than it should be, the shadows a little deeper, the air a little heavier. "You're being ridiculous, Steve," I muttered to myself as I struck a match to light my campfire. "There's nothing out here but trees and normal wildlife." The flames caught, casting a warm glow across the clearing. I heated up another freeze-dried meal and ate in silence, straining my ears for any unusual sounds. But there was nothing. No mysterious growls, no movement in the underbrush, just the normal sounds of the forest at night. As the fire died down to embers, I crawled into my tent, exhaustion from the day's hike quickly pulling me towards sleep. My last conscious thought was a hope for a peaceful, uneventful night. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when it happened. A bone-chilling howl pierced the night, jolting me awake and sending my heart racing. It wasn't the howl of a wolf or any animal I'd ever heard before. This was something primal, something that spoke to the deepest, most primitive part of my brain and screamed, "Danger." I sat up, fumbling for my flashlight with trembling hands. The beam of light danced wildly across the tent walls as I tried to steady myself. Outside, I could hear something moving, something big. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Is someone there?" No response came, just the sound of heavy footsteps circling my tent. The campfire had died down to mere embers, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the trees. In the dim, flickering light, I could see a massive silhouette moving just beyond the clearing's edge. My breath caught in my throat. It was the same figure I'd glimpsed the night before, but closer now. Much closer. And as it moved, I could make out more details. The broad, sloping shoulders, the long arms that hung below its knees, the shaggy outline of thick fur covering its entire body. "This can't be real," I whispered, pressing myself against the far side of the tent. "This can't be happening." But it was happening. The creature, and I knew now, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that this was no man in a costume or some undiscovered species of bear, was real. And it was right outside my tent. The stench hit me next, a nauseating mix of wet fur and rotting meat that seeped through the tent fabric. I gagged, fighting the urge to vomit as the smell grew stronger. The thing was getting closer. I reached for my bear spray, clutching it like a lifeline. But deep down I knew it would be useless against this monster. This was something beyond my experience, beyond my understanding. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. For a moment, all was silent. I held my breath, ears straining, every muscle in my body tense. Then, without warning, a deafening roar shattered the night. It was a sound of pure aggression, of primal rage that sent shivers down my spine. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that this creature meant me harm. "Oh God," I whimpered, pressing myself flat against the tent floor. "Please, just go away. Please." But my pleas fell on deaf ears. There was a rush of movement outside, and then, I'll never forget the sound of Bigfoot's growl as it charged at me from the trees. The ground shook with each thunderous step as the creature barreled towards my fragile shelter. Time seemed to slow down. I could see the shadow of the beast looming larger on the tent wall. In a burst of desperate energy, I lunged for the tent zipper, fingers fumbling as I tried to open an escape route. Just as I managed to create an opening, the world exploded around me. Razor-sharp claws tore through the tent fabric like it was tissue paper, missing my face by mere inches. The reek of the creature's breath washed over me, hot and fetid. I scrambled backwards, my fingers desperately searching for anything to use as a weapon. They closed around a fallen branch just as a massive, hairy arm thrust into the tent, groping blindly for me. With a yell that was equal parts terror and defiance, I swung the branch as hard as I could. There was a satisfying thunk as it connected with something solid, followed by a roar of pain and rage that shook the very air around me. The arm withdrew, and I seized my chance. I burst out of the shredded remains of my tent, adrenaline surging through my veins. The clearing was chaos. My belongings scattered everywhere, the dying embers of the fire casting just enough light to see by. And there, at the edge of the clearing, stood BigFoot in all its terrifying glory. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, with a bulk that dwarfed any human. Matted fur covered its body, and its face. God, its face. It was a twisted, ape-like visage that was almost but not quite human. And its eyes, they gleamed with a malevolent intelligence that froze me to the spot. For a moment we stood there, human and monster, locked in a standoff. Then, with a speed that belied its size, the creature lunged for me. I dove to the side, feeling the rush of air as its massive hand swiped at the space where I'd just been. I rolled, coming up in a crouch, and ran. I ran like I'd never run before, crashing through the underbrush with no thought for direction or destination. All that mattered was getting away from that thing. Behind me, I could hear the creature giving chase, trees cracking and splintering as it barreled through the forest after me. Its roars echoed through the night, spurring me on even as my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost all meaning in that mad dash through the dark forest, but eventually I spotted something. A narrow crevice in a rocky outcropping looming ahead of me in the pre-dawn light. With the last of my strength, I made a final sprint for the opening. I could feel the creature's hot breath on the back of my neck as I dove for the crevice, squeezing myself into the narrow gap, just as a massive hand swiped at me. I pressed myself as far back into the crevice as I could, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Outside, I could hear the creature's frustrated howls and the sound of it pacing back and forth. Several times it thrust its arm into the opening, claws scraping against the stone mere inches from my face. But the gap was too narrow for it to reach me. I was safe, for now. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the cracks in the rock, the noises outside finally began to fade. The howls grew more distant. The pacing stopped. But I didn't dare move. I remained huddled in my stone refuge, shaking with fear and exhaustion, as the sun slowly rose on a new day. I had survived my encounter with BigFoot, but I knew the nightmare was far from over. As I sat there, battered and bloodied, I had no idea of the ordeal that still lay ahead of me. The disbelief I would face, the ridicule, the questioning of my own sanity. But in that moment, all I could feel was a profound relief at being alive, and a bone-deep terror of what might happen if I left my sanctuary too soon. Little did I know my ordeal was just beginning. I don't know how long I huddled in that crevice, my body trembling from a mixture of fear, cold, and exhaustion. The first rays of dawn were filtering through the forest canopy when I finally mustered the courage to peek out of my rocky sanctuary. The forest seemed eerily calm, as if the violent encounter of the night before had never happened. Birds chirped in the distance, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. But I knew better. The creature was out there somewhere, waiting. "Get a grip, Steve," I muttered to myself, trying to steady my nerves. "You need to get out of here." Slowly, painfully, I extracted myself from the crevice. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest. As I stood on shaky legs, I took stock of my situation. My clothes were torn and bloodied, and I could feel a multitude of cuts and bruises all over my body. My backpack was gone, lost in the frantic flight through the forest. All I had was the clothes on my back and the bear spray I'd somehow managed to keep clutched in my hand throughout the ordeal. I needed to find my way back to civilization, but I had no idea which direction to go. The chase had left me completely disoriented. As I stood there trying to decide what to do, a twig snapped somewhere behind me. I whirled around, heart pounding. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice hoarse and trembling. No answer came, but I could sense something watching me. The creature's enormous hand clamped around my leg, dragging me towards it. I twisted around, coming face to face with the stuff of nightmares. Its mouth was open in a snarl, revealing yellowed, pointed teeth. The stench of its breath made me gag. In a burst of desperate energy, I aimed the bear spray at its face and squeezed the trigger. The creature roared in pain and fury, momentarily releasing its grip on me. I scrambled away, but I wasn't fast enough. A massive hand swatted me like I was nothing more than an annoying insect. Pain exploded through my body as I was sent flying, slamming against the trunk of a massive pine tree. I crumpled to the ground, dazed and gasping for air. Through blurred vision, I saw the creature approaching, its movement slightly unsteady from the bear spray, but no less menacing. I tried to get up, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. All I could do was watch in horror as it loomed over me. "Please," I whimpered, holding up a hand in a futile gesture of self-defense. "Please don't." The creature's response was to grab me by the front of my shirt, lifting me off the ground as if I weighed nothing. Its face was inches from mine now, and I could see the rage burning in its eyes. With a growl that I felt more than heard, it slammed me against the tree trunk again. Pain exploded through my body. I heard something crack. Ribs, probably. And stars danced in my vision. The creature held me there, pinned against the tree, its hot, fetid breath washing over me. In that moment, staring into the face of this impossible monster, I was certain I was going to die. My life didn't flash before my eyes like they say it does. All I could think about was how no one would ever know what happened to me, how my body would probably never be found, lost forever in these vast, uncaring woods. But some primal instinct for survival kicked in. My hand, seemingly of its own accord, groped along the tree trunk. It closed around something, a hefty branch that had fallen and wedged in the crook of the tree. With strength born of sheer desperation, I wrenched the branch free and swung it with all my might. There was a sickening thud as it connected with the creature's head, right above its eye. The effect was immediate. Bigfoot's grip on me loosened, and I fell to the ground in a heap. The creature staggered back, roaring in pain and shaking its massive head. A trickle of dark blood ran down its face from where the branch had struck. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. Ignoring the screaming pain in my body, I forced myself to my feet and ran. I ran like I've never run before, crashing through the underbrush with no regard for direction or stealth. All that mattered was putting distance between myself and that monster. Behind me, I could hear the creature's roars of pain and rage echoing through the forest. The sound spurred me on, even as my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. Branches whipped at my face, tearing at my already battered body, but I didn't slow down. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost all meaning in that mad dash through the forest, but eventually my body began to give out. My steps became stumbling, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I knew I couldn't keep going much longer. Just as I felt I was about to collapse, I spotted something through the trees, a break in the endless green. With the last of my strength, I pushed towards it. I burst out of the tree line onto a narrow dirt road. In the distance, I could see a small cluster of buildings. A ranger station, maybe, or a campground. Civilization. Safety. As I staggered towards the buildings, I cast one last glance over my shoulder at the dark forest behind me. For a moment, I thought I saw a large, dark shape watching me from the tree line. But then it was gone, melting back into the shadows of the forest. I turned away and focused on putting one foot in front of the other. Each step was agony, but I forced myself to keep moving. As I drew closer to the buildings, I could see people moving about. Normal, everyday people going about their lives, completely unaware of the horrors that lurked in the forest just a stone's throw away. "Help," I tried to call out, but it came out as little more than a hoarse whisper. My vision was starting to blur, the edges going dark. I was vaguely aware of shouts, of people running towards me. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was falling into the arms of a startled-looking man in a park ranger uniform. As the world faded to black around me, I heard myself mumbling, "It's out there. Bigfoot. It's real." Then darkness claimed me and I knew no more. I came to with a start, my heart pounding and my body aching. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was or what had happened. Then it all came flooding back. The attack, the chase, the narrow escape. I bolted upright, ignoring the pain that shot through my battered body. "Whoa there. Easy now," a voice said. I turned to see a man in a park ranger uniform standing nearby. "You're safe. You're at the Ho Ranger Station." I was lying on a cot in what looked like a small infirmary. Sunlight streamed through a window, telling me it was still daytime. How long had I been out? "The creature," I gasped, my voice hoarse. "Did you see it? Did anyone go after it?" The ranger exchanged a concerned look with a woman in scrubs, probably a nurse or paramedic. "Sir, you've been through quite an ordeal. Why don't you lie back down and rest?" But I couldn't rest. Not when that thing was still out there. "You don't understand," I insisted, swinging my legs over the side of the cot. "There's a monster in those woods. We have to warn people." "Mr. Williams," the nurse said, stepping forward, "you've suffered some serious injuries. You're in shock. Let's focus on getting you stabilized, okay?" I shook my head, frustration building. Why weren't they listening? "I know what I saw," I said. "It was BigFoot. It attacked me. It's real, and it's dangerous." The ranger and nurse exchanged another look, this one tinged with skepticism. I knew that look. I'd seen it before when I told people about UFO sightings or ghost stories. But this was different. This was real. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I know how it sounds, but I'm telling you the truth. That thing is out there, and it's going to hurt someone else if we don't do something." The ranger sighed. "Mr. Williams, we take all reports seriously. But right now, our priority is your health. You've got some nasty cuts and bruises and possibly a concussion. Let's get you checked out properly, okay?" I wanted to argue more, but a wave of dizziness washed over me. Maybe they were right. Maybe I did need to rest. But as I lay back down on the cot, I couldn't shake the feeling that every second we wasted was another second that monster had to escape. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical examinations and questions. A doctor arrived from the nearest town to check me over. He confirmed what I already knew. I was pretty banged up with multiple cuts and bruises, 2 cracked ribs, and a mild concussion. But miraculously, nothing life-threatening. As the doctor worked, the ranger, whose name I learned was Mike, asked me to recount what had happened. I told him everything from the first night I heard the creature to the final, terrifying confrontation. Mike listened patiently, taking notes, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. "We'll send out a search party to look for any signs of unusual activity," Mike said when I finished my story. "But Mr. Williams, I have to be honest with you. We've never had any confirmed Bigfoot sightings in this area. Are you sure it wasn't a bear?" I shook my head vehemently. "I know what I saw. It was no bear. It was bipedal, at least 8 feet tall. It had a face that was almost human, and the intelligence in its eyes." I shuddered at the memory. Mike nodded, but I could tell he didn't believe me. "All right, well, we'll look into it. In the meantime, you should rest. We've contacted your emergency contact. Your sister, I believe. She's on her way to pick you up." I wanted to protest, to insist that we go back out there right now, but exhaustion was creeping up on me, my eyelids growing heavy. As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the image of those intelligent, malevolent eyes staring at me from the forest. When I woke again, it was dark outside. The infirmary was quiet, lit only by a small desk lamp. I sat up slowly, wincing at the pain in my ribs. That's when I noticed I wasn't alone. "Steve?" "Oh, thank God you're awake." My sister Sarah rushed to my bedside, her face etched with worry. "What happened?" "The ranger said you were attacked by an animal." I took a deep breath. If anyone would believe me, it would be Sarah. We'd always been close, sharing secrets and wild stories since we were kids. "Sarah, you're not going to believe this, but it was Bigfoot." I told her everything, watching her face carefully for signs of disbelief. To her credit, she listened without interrupting, her expression growing more concerned with each passing moment. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Steve," she said finally, her voice gentle, "are you sure that's what happened?" I mean, you hit your head pretty hard. Not you too, I groaned, frustration bubbling up inside me. I know what I saw, Sarah. It was real. Why won't anyone believe me? It's not that I don't believe you, she said, but her tone said otherwise. It's just... Bigfoot? It's a pretty big claim, Steve, and there's no evidence. No evidence? I repeated incredulously. Look at me. Look at these injuries. What do you think did this? A raccoon? Sarah flinched at my outburst. I'm sorry, she said softly. I didn't mean... Look, why don't we get you home? You can rest, recover, and we can figure this out together, okay? I wanted to argue more, to make her understand. But I was tired. So tired. And the thought of going home, of sleeping in my own bed, was tempting. Maybe with some rest I could think more clearly, figure out how to prove what I'd seen. Okay, I said finally. Let's go home. As Sarah helped me gather my things and sign the discharge papers, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a mistake. That monster was still out there, somewhere in the vast wilderness of Olympic National Park, and I was the only one who knew the truth. We stepped out into the cool night air, heading towards Sarah's car. I cast one last look at the dark forest looming beyond the ranger station. For a moment I thought I saw movement among the trees, a large shadow shifting in the darkness. But when I blinked, it was gone. As we drove away from the park, leaving the scene of my terrifying encounter behind, I made a silent vow. I would find a way to prove what I'd seen. I would make them believe me, because if I didn't, who knew how many more people might fall victim to the monster lurking in those woods? But little did I know my ordeal was far from over. The real battle, the fight to be believed, to hold on to my sanity in the face of skepticism and ridicule, was just beginning. The drive back to Seattle was a blur of headlights and hushed conversation. Sarah kept glancing at me with concern, but I was lost in my own thoughts, replaying the terrifying encounter over and over in my mind. Every shadow we passed on the highway made me flinch, half expecting to see that monstrous silhouette looming in the darkness. We arrived at my apartment just as dawn was breaking. The familiar surroundings should have been comforting, but they felt alien now, as if I'd returned from another world entirely. Are you sure you don't want me to stay? Sarah asked as she helped me settle onto my couch. I can take a few days off work. I shook my head. No, I'll be fine. I just need some rest. The truth was, I needed time alone to process what had happened, to figure out my next move. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Okay, but I'm coming back this evening to check on you. And promise me you'll call if you need anything. I promise, I said, managing a weak smile. As soon as the door closed behind her, I let out a long, shaky breath. The adrenaline that had been keeping me going finally ebbed away, leaving me feeling hollow and exhausted. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that creature's face, felt its hot breath on my skin, heard its bone-chilling roar. After tossing and turning for an hour, I gave up and turned on my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. What should I search for? Bigfoot attacks? How to prove Bigfoot is real? It all seemed so absurd in the light of day, sitting in my normal, everyday apartment. A notification popped up on my screen. An email from Mike, the park ranger. My heart raced as I opened it, hoping for news, for validation. But as I read, my hopes sank. Mr. Williams, I wanted to update you on our investigation. We sent out a search party to the area you described, but found no unusual signs or tracks. There were some broken branches and disturbed undergrowth, but nothing that couldn't be explained by normal wildlife activity or your own passage through the area. We take all reports seriously, but without concrete evidence, we can't justify allocating more resources to this search. If you remember any additional details that might help, please let us know. Take care, Ranger Mike Thompson. I stared at the screen, a mix of frustration and despair washing over me. No evidence? How was that possible? The creature had torn through the forest like a hurricane. There had to be something left behind. In a burst of energy, I started searching online for similar encounters, for experts in cryptozoology, for anyone who might believe me. Hours passed as I fell down a rabbit hole of Bigfoot sightings and theories. Some seemed credible, others were clearly hoaxes, but none of them quite matched what I had experienced. A knock at the door startled me out of my research frenzy. I glanced at the clock. It was already evening. Had I really been at this all day? "Steve, it's me," Sarah called through the door. I let her in, blinking at the fading daylight that streamed through the open door. Sarah took one look at me and frowned. "Have you slept at all? You look terrible." "I'm fine," I said, waving off her concern. "Listen, I've been doing some research. There are other people who've seen similar things. If we could just—" "Steve," Sarah interrupted gently, "I think you need to rest. Maybe talk to someone. A professional, I mean." I stared at her, disbelief turning to anger. "A professional? You think I'm crazy?" "No, of course not," she backpedaled. "But you've been through a traumatic experience. It's normal to need help processing that." "I don't need to process anything," I snapped. "I need people to believe me. That thing is real, Sarah. It's out there and it's dangerous. Why can't you understand that?" Sarah's expression softened into pity, which only fueled my frustration. "Steve, I'm just worried about you. You haven't slept. You're obsessing over this. It's not healthy." I turned away from her, running my hands through my hair. How could I make her understand? How could I make anyone understand? "I think you should stay with me for a few days," Sarah said after a moment, "just until you're feeling better." The thought of leaving my apartment, of being watched and pitied, made my skin crawl. "No," I said firmly. "I'm fine here. I just need some time." We argued back and forth for a while, but eventually Sarah gave up. As she left, she cast one last worried look at me. "Please just promise me you'll try to get some rest. And call me if you need anything. Anything at all." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As soon as the door closed behind her, I slumped against it, sliding down to sit on the floor. The apartment felt too small suddenly, too confining. The walls seemed to press in on me, and I could swear I smelled that distinctive odor of wet fur and decay. Panic rose in my chest. What if it had followed me? What if it was out there right now, watching, waiting? I scrambled to my feet and rushed to the window, peering out into the darkening city streets. Nothing moved except for the usual evening traffic. No monstrous shapes lurked in the shadows. But still the fear wouldn't subside. I needed to feel safe, protected. My eyes fell on my closet door and an idea formed. It was childish, maybe even a bit crazy, but at that moment, I didn't care. I dragged my mattress into the closet, along with my laptop and phone. I gathered every flashlight I owned, plus extra batteries. As an afterthought, I grabbed a kitchen knife, though I knew it would be useless against the creature if it really came for me. Huddled in my makeshift shelter, surrounded by the familiar scents of my clothes and linens, I finally felt my racing heart begin to slow. The closet was small, confining, but that was comforting now. Nothing could sneak up on me here. I was safe. As exhaustion finally overtook me, I drifted off into an uneasy sleep. But even in my dreams, I couldn't escape. I was back in the forest, running from something I couldn't see but could feel breathing down my neck. I jolted awake several times, drenched in sweat, the creature's roar echoing in my ears. Each time I reminded myself where I was. Safe. Protected. But a nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered that nowhere was truly safe. Not anymore. Not when I knew what was out there. As the first light of dawn filtered through the cracks of the closet door, I made a decision. I couldn't live like this, jumping at shadows and hiding in closets. I needed to do something, to find proof, to make them believe me. Little did I know, my quest for validation would lead me down a path that would challenge not just others' beliefs, but my own sanity. The real battle was just beginning, and it would be fought not in the forests against a tangible monster, but in the realm of perception and credibility. With trembling hands, I reached for my laptop. It was time to start planning my next move. Time to find a way to prove that what I had experienced was real. Because if I didn't, I feared the memory of those terrifying moments in the forest would haunt me forever, leaving me trapped in a prison of fear and disbelief. The journey ahead would be difficult, I knew, but I had to try, for my own sake, and for the safety of others who might unknowingly venture into that creature's domain. With a deep breath, I opened my laptop and began to type, determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. As the first light of dawn filtered through the cracks of my closet door, I knew I couldn't stay hidden forever. My body ached, a constant reminder of the ordeal I had survived. With a groan, I pushed open the closet door and stumbled out into my apartment. The world felt different now. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. Every unexpected sound made me flinch. But I couldn't let the fear paralyze me. I had to get back to Olympic National Park. I had to find proof. I quickly packed a bag with essentials: first aid kit, water, energy bars, and my camera. As an afterthought, I grabbed a heavy flashlight. It wouldn't do much against the creature, but it was better than nothing. As I reached for my car keys, my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "How are you feeling? Want me to come over?" I hesitated, then typed back, "I'm fine. Going for a drive to clear my head. Talk later." I hated lying to her, but I knew she wouldn't understand. Nobody did. That's why I had to do this. The drive back to the park was tense. Every mile brought me closer to where it had happened, and my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. But I pressed on, driven by a desperate need for validation. As I approached the park entrance, my heart rate spiked. What if it was still out there? What if it was waiting? I shook my head, trying to dispel the paranoid thoughts. I had to focus. I parked at the trailhead where my hike had begun just 2 days ago. It felt like a lifetime had passed since then. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car and onto the trail. Every snapping twig, every rustling leaf sent waves of panic through me. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that massive, furry form emerging from the trees. But the forest remained stubbornly, maddeningly normal. As I hiked, I tried to retrace my steps from that terrifying night. But everything looked different in the daylight. Had I turned left here? Or was it further on? The uncertainty was maddening. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it as my voice echoed through the trees. What if it heard me? What if it came back? I pressed on, my breathing becoming more labored as I climbed. The pain from my injuries grew with each step, a constant reminder of the horrifying encounter I had barely survived. After what felt like hours, I reached a clearing that looked vaguely familiar. Was this where it had happened? Where I had come face to face with the impossible? I scanned the area, looking for any sign of the struggle. There had to be something. Broken branches, tufts of fur, footprints, anything. But as I searched, my hope began to fade. The forest floor was undisturbed, save for my own footprints. The trees showed no sign of the violent chase I remembered. It was as if the entire incident had been wiped clean from the forest. "No," I muttered, growing frantic. No, it was here. It happened right here. I began to dig through the leaf litter, searching desperately for any shred of evidence. My fingers scraped against the dirt, leaving them raw and bleeding, but I didn't care. I had to find something. Anything. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, I finally had to admit defeat. There was nothing here. No proof, no evidence, nothing to corroborate my story. Exhausted and disheartened, I began the long trek back to my car. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighed down by disappointment and a growing sense of doubt. Had it all been in my head? Was I losing my mind? As I neared the trailhead, I saw a figure standing by my car. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought it was the creature. But as I got closer, I recognized the uniform of a park ranger. "Mr. Williams?" the ranger called out as I approached. It was Mike, the ranger from the station. "We've been trying to reach you. Your sister called. She's worried sick." I must have looked a sight. Dirty, disheveled, wild-eyed. Mike's expression shifted from concern to alarm. "Are you all right, sir? What are you doing out here?" I opened my mouth to explain, but the words caught in my throat. How could I tell him I'd come back looking for a monster that had left no trace, that I'd spent hours digging through the dirt for proof of something that, in the harsh light of day, seemed more and more like a product of my imagination? I needed to see it again, I managed to say. To make sure. Mike's face softened with understanding, but I could see the pity in his eyes. He thought I was crazy. They all did. "Mr. Williams." "Steve," he said gently, "I know you've been through a traumatic experience, but coming back here alone was dangerous. You're injured, and these woods can be treacherous even for experienced hikers." I nodded numbly, too tired to argue. Mike continued, "I think it would be best if you came back to the station with me. We can call your sister to pick you up, maybe get you checked out by a doctor again." The thought of going back to that station, of facing more disbelief and pity, was almost unbearable. But what choice did I have? I had no proof, no evidence to back up my story, just the aches in my body and the terror that still gripped my heart. As I climbed into Mike's truck, I cast one last look at the forest. For a moment, I thought I saw movement among the trees, a large, dark shape shifting in the shadows. But when I blinked, it was gone. Was it real? Or was my mind playing tricks on me? I didn't know anymore. And that uncertainty, that doubt, was perhaps the most terrifying thing of all. The drive back to the ranger station was silent. Mike attempted some small talk, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. My mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. I knew what I had experienced. The terror, the pain, the certainty of death. It had all been real. Hadn't it? As we pulled up to the station, I saw Sarah's car already parked outside. My heart sank. I wasn't ready to face her, to see the worry and doubt in her eyes. Mike helped me out of the truck, his hand on my arm both supportive and restraining. As we walked towards the station, I could see Sarah through the window, pacing anxiously. The moment we stepped inside, she rushed towards me. "Steve, oh my God, what were you thinking? I've been worried sick." I opened my mouth to explain, to defend myself, but no words came out. How could I make her understand when I was starting to doubt myself? As Sarah fussed over me, checking my injuries and peppering me with questions, I caught sight of my reflection in a window. I hardly recognized the man staring back at me, wild-eyed, disheveled, with a haunted look that spoke of horrors witnessed and truths questioned. In that moment, I realized that my ordeal was far from over. The encounter in the forest might have ended, but a new battle was just beginning. A battle against doubt, disbelief, and my own fragile grip on reality. As I sank into a chair, overwhelmed by exhaustion and uncertainty, I knew that the coming days would test me in ways I couldn't imagine. The creature might have disappeared back into the forest, leaving no trace, but its impact on my life was only just beginning to unfold. Little did I know the real challenges lay ahead, not in the dark forests of Olympic National Park, but in the skeptical eyes of those around me and the deepest recesses of my own mind. The fluorescent lights of the hospital emergency room buzzed overhead, harsh and unforgiving. I sat on the edge of an examination table, my sister Sarah beside me, as we waited for the doctor to return. The events of the past 2 days swirled in my mind, a chaotic mix of terror, pain, and growing uncertainty. "Mr. Williams?" A voice pulled me from my thoughts. I looked up to see a middle-aged man in a white coat entering the room, a clipboard in his hand. "I'm Dr. Patel. I understand you've had quite an ordeal in the forest." I nodded, wincing as the movement sent a jolt of pain through my battered body. "You could say that," I muttered. Dr. Patel glanced at his clipboard, then back at me. "According to the initial report, you claim you were attacked by BigFoot?" His tone was carefully neutral, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. "I know how it sounds," I began, my voice hoarse. "But I'm telling you it was real. It was huge, at least 8 feet tall, covered in fur. It chased me through the forest, tried to kill me. The doctor nodded, making a note on his clipboard. And can you describe your injuries? How did you receive them? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. It grabbed me, slammed me against a tree. I've got cuts and bruises all over from the chase through the forest. My ribs. I winced, touching my side gently. I think they might be broken. Dr. Patel listened patiently, his face impassive. When I finished, he set down his clipboard and began examining me. His touch was clinical, professional, but I couldn't help flinching every time his hands neared a particularly painful spot. "Well, Mr. Williams," he said finally, stepping back, "you do indeed have some significant injuries. 2 cracked ribs, multiple lacerations and contusions, and a mild concussion. However," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "these injuries are consistent with a fall in rough terrain, possibly exacerbated by panic and disorientation." I stared at him in disbelief. "A fall? Doctor, I'm telling you, I was attacked. This wasn't some hiking accident." Dr. Patel held up a hand, his voice gentle but firm. "Mr. Williams, I understand you believe what you're saying, but the human mind can play tricks on us, especially in stressful situations. It's not uncommon for people to misinterpret events or even create false memories during traumatic experiences." I felt a surge of anger rising in my chest. "I'm not crazy," I snapped. "I know what I saw, what I experienced." "Steve," Sarah interjected, her voice soft. "No one's saying you're crazy, but maybe you were confused. It was dark. You were alone in the woods." I turned to her, feeling a sense of betrayal. "Not you too, Sarah. You're my sister. You're supposed to believe me." The look of pity in her eyes was almost more than I could bear. "I want to believe you, Steve. But BigFoot? It's just so hard to accept." Dr. Patel cleared his throat, drawing our attention back to him. "Mr. Williams, I'm going to prescribe you some pain medication for your injuries. I also think it might be beneficial for you to speak with one of our staff psychologists. Traumatic experiences can be difficult to process, and having someone to talk to can be very helpful." I laughed bitterly. "A psychologist? So you can have someone officially declare me insane?" "Steve," Sarah said warningly, but I was beyond caring. "No, I get it," I continued, my voice rising. "It's easier to believe I'm crazy than to accept that there might be something out there we can't explain. Well, I don't need your pills or your shrinks. I know what happened to me." Dr. Patel remained calm in the face of my outburst. "No one is questioning your sincerity, Mr. Williams. We simply want to ensure you receive the best care possible, both physically and mentally." I was about to argue further when a knock at the door interrupted us. A police officer entered, his face serious. "Mr. Williams, I'm Officer Johnson. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your experience in the park, if you're feeling up to it." For a moment, hope flared in my chest. Maybe the police would take me seriously. Maybe they'd found some evidence. But as the officer began his questioning, that hope quickly faded. His questions became more pointed, more skeptical with each retelling of my story. "And you're certain it wasn't a bear?" he asked for what felt like the 100th time. "For the last time, no," I said, frustration evident in my voice. "It was bipedal. It had a face that was almost human. It was BigFoot." Officer Johnson exchanged a look with Dr. Patel that spoke volumes. They didn't believe me. None of them did. As the interview dragged on, I could feel myself growing more agitated. The pain in my body seemed to intensify with each disbelieving question, each skeptical glance. Finally, mercifully, it was over. Officer Johnson thanked me for my time, his tone making it clear he considered this a waste of police resources. As he left, I overheard him speaking to Dr. Patel in the hallway. "Probably just another attention seeker," he said. "Or maybe he got drunk and fell down a ravine. Either way, Not much we can do without any evidence. Their words hit me like a physical blow. I slumped back on the examination table, suddenly feeling utterly drained. Sarah placed a hand on my arm, her touch gentle. "Steve, why don't we get you home? You need rest." I nodded numbly, too tired to argue anymore. As we left the hospital, I could feel the stares of the staff and other patients. Word of my wild story had clearly spread. The drive home was silent, the weight of disbelief and skepticism hanging heavy between Sarah and me. As we pulled up to my apartment building, I turned to her. "You don't believe me either, do you?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Sarah sighed, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and something that looked uncomfortably like pity. "I believe that you believe it, Steve, but BigFoot, it's just so hard to accept." I nodded, a bitter taste in my mouth. "Yeah, I get it. Thanks for the ride." As I climbed out of the car, Sarah called after me. "Steve, please, just take care of yourself, okay? And call me if you need anything." I waved her off, not trusting myself to speak. As I trudged up to my apartment, I felt utterly alone. The one person I thought I could count on to believe me, and even she thought I was delusional. Inside my apartment, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror. The man staring back at me looked haggard, wild-eyed. For a moment, I could almost understand why no one believed me. But then I remembered. The terror, the pain, the certainty of death as that creature bore down on me. It had been real. I knew it had been real. As I sank onto my couch, exhaustion and despair washing over me, I realized that my ordeal was far from over. The creature might have disappeared back into the forest, but its impact on my life was only just beginning to unfold. The battle ahead would not be fought in the dark woods against a tangible monster, but in the realm of perception and credibility. And as I sat there, alone with my thoughts and the aches of my battered body, I wondered if this fight might prove even more challenging than facing the creature itself. Sleep eluded me that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that monstrous face, felt those powerful hands grabbing at me. The pain from my injuries served as a constant reminder of the reality of my experience, no matter what others believed. As the first light of dawn filtered through my blinds, I made a decision. I couldn't just sit here and let everyone think I was crazy. I needed proof. I needed to go back. Ignoring the protests of my battered body, I got dressed and gathered some supplies. Camera, voice recorder, plaster casting kit for footprints, anything that might help document evidence. As I packed, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "How are you feeling? Want me to come over?" I hesitated, then typed back, "I'm fine. Just resting." Another lie, but I couldn't risk her trying to stop me. The drive back to Olympic National Park was tense. Every mile brought a mixture of determination and dread. What if I found nothing? What if the creature was still out there? I parked at the same trailhead where my nightmare had begun just 2 days ago. As I stepped out of the car, the forest loomed before me, dark and foreboding. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "You can do this, Steve," I muttered. "You have to do this." I set off down the trail, my senses hyper-alert. Every snapping twig, every rustling leaf sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. But I pressed on, determined to find something, anything that would validate my story. Hours passed as I retraced my steps from that terrifying night. I scoured the area where I remembered the attack taking place, searching for any sign of the struggle. But the forest seemed maddeningly unchanged. "Come on," I growled in frustration, kicking at a pile of leaves. "There has to be something." I took photos of everything, broken branches, disturbed earth, anything that might possibly be evidence. But deep down, I knew none of it was conclusive. It could all be explained away by normal forest activity. As the day wore on, desperation began to set in. I found myself talking out loud, as if trying to convince an invisible jury. "Look at this," I said, pointing my camera at a scuff mark on a tree trunk. "This could be where it grabbed me, see? And these broken branches. That's from when it chased me. But even as I said the words, I could hear how weak they sounded. I had no real proof, nothing that couldn't be easily dismissed. The sun was beginning to set when I heard a noise that made my blood run cold, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I froze, my heart pounding. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Is someone there?" Silence answered me, broken only by the pounding of my own heart. Then, movement caught my eye. Something large shifted in the shadows just beyond the tree line. For a moment, hope and terror warred within me. If it was the creature, it could kill me, but it would also prove I wasn't crazy. I raised my camera with trembling hands, trying to focus on the shadowy area where I'd seen the movement. "Come on," I whispered. "Show yourself." Another growl, closer this time. I could smell that familiar stench of wet fur and decay. It was here. It was real. "I knew it," I said, a hysterical laugh bubbling up in my throat. "I knew you were real." I took a step forward, camera at the ready. This was it. This was the proof I needed. Suddenly, a massive form burst from the underbrush. For a split second, I saw it clearly. The shaggy fur, the powerful limbs, the almost human face contorted in a snarl. My finger pressed the shutter button frantically. Then it was gone, melting back into the forest with impossible speed for something so large. I stood there, shaking, my camera clutched to my chest like a lifeline. "I got you," I whispered. "I finally got you." With trembling hands, I checked the camera's display. My heart sank. The photos were blurry, indistinct, just vague shapes in the shadows that could be anything, or nothing at all. "No," I moaned, scrolling through the images desperately. No, it was right there, I saw it. But the evidence I'd hoped for simply wasn't there. Once again, BigFoot had evaded capture, leaving me with nothing but my own shaken testimony. As the reality of my failure sank in, I became aware of how dark it had gotten. The forest around me seemed to close in, shadows deepening into potential hiding places for unseen monsters. Fear, held at bay by determination all day, came rushing back. I had to get out of here. Now. I turned and ran, no longer caring about finding evidence. All that mattered was getting back to my car, back to safety. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me, but I didn't slow down. I burst out of the tree line onto the parking lot, gasping for breath. My car sat there, a beacon of normalcy in the gathering darkness. As I fumbled for my keys, I cast one last look back at the forest. For a moment I thought I saw something, a large dark shape moving among the trees. But when I blinked, it was gone. I practically dove into my car, locking the doors behind me. As I sat there, trying to calm my racing heart, the full weight of my failure hit me. I had no proof. Nothing to show for my desperate search except more bruises and a camera full of useless photos. What now? How could I make anyone believe me when I had nothing to back up my story? As I started the car and began the long drive home, I felt a deep sense of despair settling over me. The creature was out there. I knew it with every fiber of my being, but without proof, I was just another crazy person with a wild story. The road ahead stretched out before me, dark and lonely, much like the path I now faced, a solitary journey to either prove my sanity or come to terms with the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I really had imagined it all. But as I drove, one thought kept repeating in my mind. I know what I saw. I know what happened to me. And somehow, some way, I would find a way to prove it. I had to. Because the alternative, accepting that I might be losing my grip on reality, was too terrifying to contemplate. Little did I know, the real challenges were only just beginning. The battle ahead would test not just my credibility, but my very sanity. And as I drove home, alone with my thoughts and the aches of my twice-battered body, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there in the darkness, something was watching, waiting, and maybe, just maybe, it wasn't finished with me yet. The The drive home from Olympic National Park was a blur of headlights and shadows. Every dark shape along the roadside made me flinch, half expecting to see that monstrous figure lurking in the darkness. By the time I reached my apartment, I was a wreck of nerves and exhaustion. As I fumbled with my keys, my neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, poked her head out of her door. "Steve, is that you? Are you all right, dear? You look terrible." I forced a weak smile. "I'm fine, Mrs. Johnson. Just had a rough couple of days." She frowned, concern etching deeper lines into her kindly face. "I heard about your accident in the park, such a shame. You know, my nephew works for the Forest Service. He says bear attacks are becoming more common these days." "It wasn't a bear," I muttered, then immediately regretted it as her eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Oh? What was it then?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to tell her everything, to unburden myself of this terrible secret. But the memory of disbelieving faces, doctors, police, even my own sister, held me back. "Nothing," I said finally. Just a bad fall. I'm fine, really. Good night, Mrs. Johnson." I retreated into my apartment before she could ask any more questions. As soon as the door closed behind me, I slumped against it, the weight of the past 2 days crashing down on me all at once. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and plagued by nightmares. I dreamed of being chased through endless dark forests, always just one step ahead of something huge and terrifying that I could never quite see. I woke up several times drenched in sweat, the creature's roar echoing in my ears. As dawn broke, I gave up on sleep entirely. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the camera that had failed to capture the proof I so desperately needed. The urge to review the photos one more time, to find something I might have missed, was overwhelming. With trembling hands, I turned on the camera and began scrolling through the images. Blurry trees, indistinct shadows. Nothing that could definitively prove what I had seen. A knock at the door startled me out of my frustrated examination. I opened it to find Sarah standing there, a worried frown on her face. "Steve? You weren't answering your phone." I was worried. I stepped aside to let her in, suddenly aware of how I must look, disheveled, unshaven, wild-eyed. Sarah took in my appearance with growing concern. "Have you slept at all? You look terrible." "I'm fine," I said, waving off her concern. "Listen, Sarah, I need to show you something." I grabbed the camera and began flipping through the photos, explaining each one in rapid-fire detail. "Look, see this shadow here? That's where it was standing. And these broken branches? That's from when it chased me." Sarah listened patiently, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. When I finished, she gently took the camera from my hands. "Steve," she said softly, "I know you believe you saw something out there, but these photos, they don't really show anything concrete." "But I saw it," I insisted, my voice rising. "It was right there, Sarah, right in front of me. How can you not believe me?" Sarah sighed, setting the camera down. "It's not that I don't believe you saw something, Steve, but BigFoot, it's hard to accept. Maybe it was a bear or—" "It wasn't a bear," I shouted, frustration boiling over. "I know what I saw. Why won't anyone believe me?" Sarah flinched at my outburst, and I immediately felt guilty. She was only trying to help, after all, but the constant doubt, the pitying looks, the gentle suggestions that maybe I was mistaken, it was all becoming too much to bear. "I'm sorry," I said, slumping into a chair. I don't know what to do, Sarah. I know what happened to me. It was real. But I have no way to prove it." Sarah sat down next to me, placing a comforting hand on my arm. "I know this is hard for you, Steve, but maybe it's time to talk to someone. A professional, I mean. Someone who can help you process what happened." I laughed bitterly. "A shrink, you mean? So they can tell me I'm delusional? That I imagined the whole thing?" "That's not what I'm saying," Sarah insisted. "But you've been through a traumatic experience. Whether it was BigFoot or or something else talking to someone could help. I wanted to argue more, to make her understand. But I was so tired. Tired of fighting, tired of trying to convince people, tired of doubting my own sanity. Maybe you're right, I said finally, though the words tasted like ash in my mouth. Maybe I do need to talk to someone. Sarah looked relieved. I think that's a good idea. I can help you find someone if you want. I nodded numbly, not trusting myself to speak. As Sarah busied herself looking up therapists on her phone, I found my gaze drawn to the window. The forest might be miles away, but I could almost feel it calling to me. And somewhere out there I knew that creature was still roaming free. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Sarah helped me clean up my apartment, ordered some food, and generally fussed over me like I was an invalid. I appreciated her concern, but part of me resented it too. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't sick. I had seen something real, something that defied explanation, and no amount of therapy or well-meaning concern was going to change that. As evening fell, Sarah prepared to leave. "Are you sure you'll be okay alone?" she asked for the 100th time. "I can stay if you want." I shook my head. "I'll be fine. Thanks for everything, Sarah." She hugged me tightly. "Call me if you need anything, okay? Day or night." After she left, the apartment felt oppressively quiet. I found myself jumping at every little sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the creaking of pipes in the walls. Every shadow seemed to hide potential threats. As I got ready for bed, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. The man staring back at me looked haggard, haunted. For a moment, I could almost understand why no one believed me. I hardly recognized myself, but as I traced the fading bruises on my body, felt the twinge of my still healing ribs, I knew with absolute certainty that what I had experienced was real. The creature was out there, and somehow, some way, I would find a way to prove it. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The encounter in the forest might be over, but its impact on my life was only starting to unfold. The real battle lay ahead, a battle against doubt, disbelief, and my own fragile grip on reality. Little did I know, as I finally drifted off into an uneasy sleep, that the challenges ahead would test me in ways I couldn't imagine. The creature might have disappeared back into the forest, but its shadow would loom over my life for a long time to come. The sun had barely risen when I found myself wide awake, the remnants of another nightmare clinging to my consciousness like cobwebs. I dreamt of the creature again, its massive form looming over me, those intelligent eyes filled with malevolence. Even in the safety of my bedroom, I could almost smell its rank, musky odor. I dragged myself out of bed, wincing at the pain in my still healing ribs. The physical reminders of my encounter were fading, but the mental scars felt as fresh as ever. As I made my way to the kitchen, I caught sight of my reflection in the hallway mirror. The man staring back at me looked haggard, with dark circles under his eyes and a haunted expression that I barely recognized. "Pull yourself together, Steve," I muttered, running a hand through my disheveled hair. The kitchen counter was cluttered with pamphlets and business cards, information on therapists and support groups that Sarah had left behind. I swept them into the trash with a frustrated swipe of my arm. How could I talk to a therapist about this? How could I make anyone understand what I'd been through? As I waited for my coffee to brew, my gaze drifted to the window. The city sprawled out before me, a sea of concrete and steel so far removed from the primal terror of the forest. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched, still being hunted. A knock at the door startled me out of my reverie. I opened it to find my neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, standing there with a covered dish in her hands. "Good morning, Steve," she said, her voice overly cheerful. "I thought you might like some of my homemade lasagna. You know, to help you recover from your accident." The hesitation before the word accident was slight, but noticeable. I forced a smile. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Johnson. Thank you." She peered at me with concern. Are you sure you're all right, dear? You look like you haven't slept a wink. For a moment, I was tempted to tell her everything, to unburden myself of this terrible secret that was eating me up inside. But the memory of disbelieving faces, doctors, police, even my own sister, held me back. I'm fine, I lied. Just still a bit shaken up, I guess. Mrs. Johnson nodded sympathetically. Of course. These things take time. You know, my late husband used to say that nature can be beautiful, but it can also be terribly dangerous. Bears, mountain lions, and all sorts of creatures out there. I nodded absently, not trusting myself to speak. If only she knew the true danger that lurked in those woods. After Mrs. Johnson left, I found myself at loose ends. The thought of returning to work, of trying to resume my normal life, seemed impossible. How could I sit in an office, attend meetings, engage in small talk when I knew what was out there? I spent the morning pacing my apartment, alternating between bouts of restless energy and periods of paralyzing fear. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that creature's face, heard its bone-chilling roar. Around midday, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. How are you feeling? Did you call any of those therapists? I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. How could I explain that the thought of talking to a therapist filled me with dread? That I feared being labeled as delusional or attention-seeking? Finally, I typed back, I'm fine. Just need some time. Sarah's response was almost immediate. Steve, I'm worried about you. Maybe I should come over. No, I replied quickly. I just need to be alone for a while. I turned off my phone, unable to bear any more well-meaning concern. The silence in the apartment was oppressive, broken only by the ticking of the clock and the occasional car passing on the street below. As afternoon faded into evening, I found myself drawn to the window again. The city lights were coming on, creating a false twilight that pushed back the encroaching darkness. But as I stared out at the urban landscape, my mind was far away, in the deep dark woods where my life had changed forever. A sudden movement in my peripheral vision made me jump. I whirled around, heart pounding, half expecting to see the creature somehow in my living room. But there was nothing there, just shadows and furniture. Get a grip, I muttered to myself, pressing the heels of my hands against my eyes. But even as I tried to calm myself, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As night fell, the sounds of the city seemed to fade away, replaced by an eerie silence that reminded me all too much of the forest just before the attack. Every creak of the building, every distant siren set my nerves on edge. I found myself checking and rechecking the locks on my doors and windows, even though I knew logically that I was safe here. The creature couldn't possibly have followed me to the city. Could it? As I sat on my couch, the TV on but muted, my eyes kept drifting to the dark shapes outside my window. More than once, I thought I saw something move, a large, shadowy figure that disappeared as soon as I focused on it. It's not real, I told myself firmly. It's just your imagination. You're safe here. But even as I said the words, I knew they were a lie. I might be physically safe in my apartment, but mentally, emotionally, I was still trapped in that forest, still running from a monster that no one else believed existed. As the night wore on, sleep continued to elude me. I paced my apartment, jumping at every sound, peering out the windows at the slightest provocation. Part of me knew I was being irrational, that I was letting fear control me. But a deeper, more primal part insisted that vigilance was the only way to stay alive. In the early hours of the morning, as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, I finally collapsed onto my bed, exhaustion overcoming fear. But even as I drifted off, I couldn't shake the certainty that somewhere out there, the creature was still roaming free, still hunting, still waiting. My last conscious thought before sleep claimed me was a grim realization. This was my life now, forever changed by an encounter that no one believed, haunted by a creature that had vanished without a trace. The battle ahead would not be fought in the dark woods against a tangible monster, but in the realm of perception and credibility. And as I finally succumbed to exhaustion, I wondered if this fight might prove even more challenging than facing the creature itself. Little did I know, as I fell into an uneasy sleep, that the true test of my resolve and my sanity was only just beginning. The creature might have disappeared back into the forest, but its impact on my life was far from over. The journey ahead would be long and difficult, filled with doubt, disbelief, and the constant struggle to hold on to the truth of what I had experienced. That memory, that truth, would stay with me forever. A constant reminder of the thin line between the world we think we know and the terrifying realities that lurk just beyond our understanding.